late. Hello. There you go. Thank you. We're going to start now. Thank you. Thank you. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation regarding Resolution number 160640. Mr. Stitt, please read the title of the resolution.
Resolution number 160640, authorizing the Committee on Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation to hold hearings regarding the city's operating budget for fiscal 2017 to examine, analyze, and provide oversight on the financial condition of the City of Philadelphia.
Thank you. Today we've been in public hearing of the Committee on Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation to consider a resolution read by the clerk that constitutes an examination of the city's operating budget for fiscal 2017 and the city's fiscal health overall. Today we will hear testimony from the administration, followed by testimony from other witnesses. Let's get right to the meat of it. And Mr. Stitt, the first people to testify is
Rob DeBoe, Anna Wallace-Adams, and Rashida Johnson.
Just getting in with the challenge for us.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. First, I would like to thank you all for working with the council to conclude another successful budget session. It was a blast.
Thank you for all of your work, all the council.
But one thing, although I just want to briefly say this, that we're pretty comfortable to a degree in terms of the direction of the city. New residents coming in, collections are up. It appears to be somewhat, actually the school district, can you believe it? It's actually somewhat fiscally sound at this point in time. But, the reality of government, local, state, federal, there are always cycles. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we continue our fiscal health in a meaningful and a proactive way, not when a challenge arises, one of the rating agencies makes a decision or PICA or some other entity externally decides that we're not where we need to be. I think it's clear, it's obvious that we, both the administration and the legislative branch of government, have the wherewithal to ensure that we maintain not only a plateau, but actually have an upward trend. So I want to thank you all so much for continuing to work with us as we move ahead. So, Mr. DeBoe, who's going to go first? Mr. DeBoe?
Yeah, I'm actually the only one of the three of us who has testimony, and then we're all here to answer questions.
Okay, you just want to answer, everybody just want to answer questions?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to turn to my question page. Did everybody have testimony? Caught me off guard, Mr. DeBoe. I thought you were going to say something.
Do you want me to read a testimony, or do you want to just go to questions?
That's all good.
You've seen the testimony. Okay.
That's my fault for being caught off guard. All right. Well, let me just wing it. So, Mr. DeBoe, briefly, how would you consider just summarize our fiscal health as a city and any potential pitfalls and some of the revenue projections or some of the projections with respect to the fiscal health of our city, not necessarily just us, but what's going on. How do you think?
I think the one number that kind of best captures a city's fiscal condition is its fund balance. We are now projecting our fund balance for FY16 to be around $105 million. And then we project that it'll go down within a couple of years to $47 million. Those are really low numbers. They're low as a percent of our overall revenues, so that $47 million, for example, is only about 1% of revenues. So while I think it's not kind of, on the border of danger. It's very low compared to other jurisdictions. It means that our financial health compared to other jurisdictions is probably weaker, and that's why when you look at where the rating agencies have us, they have us as, solid investment quality, but lower than all but 2 of the other largest 20 cities in the country.
Okay. Let me move to a recent event. So yesterday, Moody's downgraded Philadelphia to a negative credit outlook. Our rating is still pretty good, and we're very proud of that. And the reasons for the downgrade and outlook include the city's inability to achieve a structural budget balance, continually low fund balance levels, and our continued high fixed debt burden, and the fact that our expenditures continue to outpace revenue growth. And I understand a lot of the revenue growth is based on fixed costs. Can you just kind of quickly talk about the city's strategy in terms of addressing those issues? And
right. So there are a few things that we want to do over the long run. One, and I think that's part of what we'll hear in the second part of the hearing, is making sure that we collect everything that's due to us. And revenue's been pretty aggressive in going about doing that. We have $70 million more in collections over the life of the plan. We're in the process of doing a full commercial reassessment. We think that will help generate more revenue as we capture values for commercial properties. We need to grow our economy, kind of both, in the short term and the long term. Commerce Department has, lots of efforts working there. We think pre-K and community schools will help for the long term, as, they make sure that kids start school prepared. So kind of a whole range of things that I think we need to do. On the pension side, a couple of things. One, we entered a collective bargaining agreement with DC 33. Under that agreement, new employees will go into a stacked hybrid plan. Existing employees will increase their contributions. We'd really like to try to get that for all of our unions. At the same time, the sales tax increase that was passed at the state level dedicates an increasing amount of money to pensions, and we're committed to making sure that that amount is above the MMO rather than supplanting the MMO, so that should help with our funding percent. We had our actuary do an analysis that showed if we were able to get the changes we got for 32 for all our unions and keep putting the sales tax money towards our pension fund, we'd reach 80% funded in about a dozen years. So that's some of the things that we're trying to do to...
With respect to our sales tax revenue,
yeah.
Are we at a point where we're actually now getting money from that revenue stream going to the pension fund? I know the first couple of years we had to pay back debt service on an earlier borrowing.
Yeah.
So we're beyond that?
Well, we're still paying back the debt service on the borrowing through 18, but we're starting to get money. We started to get money in 16. We got about $9 million. By the end of the 5-year plan, we project that'll be up to $53 million going into the pension fund.
By the end of the 5-year plan?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So your sales tax projections continue on an upward trajectory.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that it goes up so much is that the debt service goes away on that other borrowing.
All right. Is there a, what is our sales tax? Are you suggesting, separate and aside from the debt service payments, is the sales tax going up?
Yes.
Revenues? Can you tell me?
I'll ask Anna to answer the growth rate question.
I'll find the exact growth rates, but yeah, we assume a natural growth in the sales tax every year. We also, with the broadening of the base that the state just recently passed, we assume that also affects the sales tax, and that actually, because of the way that the sales tax is split, that we assume there's about $1 million or $1.5 million that goes to the general fund and an additional $1.5 million that goes to the pension fund, just because of that base broadening that the state just passed.
You say broadening of the base, sales tax base?
Yes.
What is that?
So they included things like digital downloads are now subject to the sales tax that weren't previously subject to it. And so the state gave us an estimate of how much that would affect Philadelphia. And we in the recently approved plan by PICA, we included that increase in revenue from the broadening of the base.
Okay. Got a couple more, but I'm going to defer to my colleagues now. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon to each of you. You answered sort of my first question in response to the President's questioning about pension payments, and I wanted you to give us the number for our MMO, and you noted that the sales tax revenue generated, you made the decision that would be in addition to the MMO. So can you give us the numbers of what you sort of on an annual basis project that it would be? What is our MMO now, and how much in addition as it relates to the sales tax revenue are we talking about contributing?
So the general fund portion of our MMO for 17 is about $520 million. And then on top of that, we are adding the sales tax money, which is, let's see, that would be about 16 million more in 17.
16 million more in addition. Okay, let me ask you, and you in your testimony, you give us a projection about what the 16 million, how fast it sort of helps us move to addressing the issue associated with the unfunded liability. Let me just ask you, have we had any further discussions about the sort of $5 billion in unfunded liability associated with Plan 67?
Right.
And the last idea that I heard being thrown out was some sort of a buyout plan, but I don't know if there was any additional discussion after that.
Right. So I think the point you're making is that of our $5.9 billion in unfunded liability, 5.2 is from Plan 67, which no one's entered in decades. So it's a legacy cost, and the controller in particular made a couple of proposals for how to address that involved buyouts or conversions into Plan 87, and the pension board is going to have meetings to examine the second option, the conversion option. Those meetings haven't happened yet, but they will.
They will, okay. But no sort of formal discussion or determination about whether or not that's a direction that the board is interested in moving in. Nothing official has been made.
Correct. The board agreed to actually look at it as a committee of the whole, but we have not had those meetings yet.
Okay. Next question is, when I look at Moody's summary, it mentions that the number one factor associated with leading us that could lead us to an upgrade in the future is the expansion in the tax base and strengthening of the socioeconomic profile. So obviously job creation, right? You got to grow the pie. But I'm immediately thinking about this push in Harrisburg that I've heard about as it relates to the Sterling Act and that portion of the wage tax that's paid by non-residents. And I'm just wondering whether or not, have we had any conversations with the governor's office and our leadership over in the Senate and in the House, and is it being fast-tracked? Is it discussions underway?
We've had a number of conversations, both with the executive and legislative branch, to express our concern about that. And as you can imagine, our delegation shares that concern. Don't think it's on a fast track, but we're monitoring it very closely.
Have you put a monetary value towards the negative impact that would have on the city of Philadelphia?
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, we've done a preliminary analysis, and it looks like it'd be about $80 million a year.
80 million annually. Okay. Final question is the issue of performance-based budgeting. Talk about, and I know you were sort of moving forward, and I remember her talking during this previous cycle about the administration's transition. Talk to us how you think about moving in that direction will impact the overall fiscal stability.
So we have started the meetings with departments to work towards moving towards program-based budgeting. We think that we're aiming to have 15 to 20 departments ready to introduce when we propose the budget in a program-based budgeting format, which means that instead of the current process where you would see the budget detail by division, by department by division, you would see it instead by program, which should more accurately reflect the activities that the department does. We also want to include performance metrics that are associated with those programs, as well as potentially other costs and revenues that could also be attributed to that program. We think that by moving in this direction, we'll actually have a much more sort of transparent way of evaluating how well a program is doing and what we get for that money, whatever we're paying, what do we get for that investment in that program. I think it's a little early to tell what impact that would have. I think it will allow us to make better decisions, and I think it will be clearer when there are things that we potentially could do about fees. I know that was one of the issues that was brought up quite a lot during the budget process this year. Are our fees appropriate for the program? What are the program doing? I think by seeing them kind of side by side, we'll be able to make a better decision that way. But I think it's a little early for us. It was so in the weeds right now, just figuring out what the programs are before we can actually figure out whether it's going to have any savings.
Okay, and I appreciate your response. I'd be very much interested in seeing what the bottom line looks out and sort of comparing that to outcomes, because sometimes for us to mention performance-based and/or program-based and/or zero-based budgeting, it all sounds very sexist and very reformist-like, but ultimately in the end, will it help us deliver better services to our constituents in the city? So I'll be watching very closely. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Darrell.
Thank you, Council President. I also want to thank publicly Matt Stitt and Bob McDermott for the excellent work they did in preparing us for this meeting today. It was as good as the information I've seen on any topic, and you guys did a great job, and I appreciate the work you guys did.
Yeah, I get nervous every time they prepare a document like this and somebody's going to come knocking on the door and try and hire them away from us, you know?
You better make sure you keep them there. They're good.
Yeah, I know. But you're absolutely correct. They did a great job. Thank you.
I've seen a lot of presentations, and theirs was top-notch, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyway, good afternoon. And first, I want to thank you all for all of our meetings we've had this past summer, where I've dragged you into my office and asking you questions. I appreciate your cooperation. But I have a lot of questions for you today, and I'll try to go easy. But I guess the main focus here is the low fund balance, as you pointed out, and the underfunded pension. And I just want to clarify, is the underfunded pension number 5.96 billion? What is that number right now?
5.9.
5.9, okay. So here's just a general question. The city policy recommends the fund balance, this is from the city policy, be 7% of expenditures in government, and the Government Financial Officers Association recommends 16.7 of expenditures, or 2 months of spending. However, you state in your testimony the city has a goal of 6%. I'm just wondering where that figure comes from when the policy says 7.
So the policy actually says between 6 and 8%, and I think in the analysis that you got from staff, they chose the midpoint.
Okay. And so, and where are we today, roughly, as a percentage?
Probably around 2 or 3. But we go down to 1, and then we come back up, back to the 2 to 3 range. So we're much lower than we should be.
Okay. And when I looked at the chart that was put together, I don't know if you've seen this chart, it's a pretty impressive chart. Of the top cities, the 20 cities with populations between 500,000 and 4 million, we seem to have the lowest reserves.
As a percent of, that's right. That's the one thing that seems to most distinguish us from the other cities.
And do you have any specific suggestions on how to get us to that 5 to 7% level?
So I think, kind of in general, when we've managed our fund balance, this may be too stark a term, but we've managed almost in survival mode, which is to have our fund balance be the lowest amount that it can be to make sure that we have enough cash to get through the year. I think we'd have to have a different approach to fund balance, which would be that our fund balance should be something that provides a substantial cushion in times of stress. That would mean significant trade-offs over time, though, because there are things that we invest in that we wouldn't be able to invest in as we build up that fund balance.
So let me ask a question. I know that we're looking at it now, and OPA's been cooperative, and I know we have Walter Spencer testifying, but clearly, in the area of commercial assessments, the analysis is at least $75 million of taxes we're not collecting. And I can cite specific examples that are not even close in numbers, like buildings that sell for $137 million in 2010 that we have assessed for $20 million. Those types of things being fixed, that one property, as an example, is $8 million of revenue we've lost. Can that money, if we correct it, go towards the fund balance, or is that going towards pensions, or where does that money get allocated?
So, as you know, we're going through the commercial reassessment and based partially on mostly on council's recommendation, we have some outside help to help us get those numbers right. I think, if those numbers come in at much higher than what we have projected in our plan, as you say, we should really look at saying, okay, we're going to put some of that money into pensions, some of that into our fund balance, and that would be a way to build it up.
But in your testimony, I think you said there's about $70 million over the next 4 or 5 years you hope to collect in
delinquent collections.
Delinquent collections, right?
Yeah.
And is there anything in there what did you project to collect on commercial assessments?
Commercial assessments, we have commercial assessments, I think they drop to about 17 billion, and then they go up to about 20 billion. So I think by the end, between the city and the school districts, it's probably about $30 million more than we collect now. So for the city, it's probably about 14 million. So if the numbers in Walt's testimony are right, there would be, tens of millions of dollars extra revenue.
So if we are able to accomplish that one goal of fixing commercial assessments of 75 million, wouldn't that go a long way to solving this fund balance problem?
It would help. It wouldn't get us close to where peer cities are, but it would definitely help. And I think we'd also have to have a discussion of how we'd want to allocate that between fund balance and pensions, because they're two competing structural long-term problems.
Right. So the two areas that I'm focused on are property assessments and delinquent taxes. And I know that we did that study that showed there's potentially $90 to $120 million we could collateralize on the $500 million of delinquent taxes out there right now, not counting the $250 million of water and sewer delinquent. But it also said that we could collect ongoing $25 to $40 million more. Have we thought about and I think today's the deadline for the RFP?
I think it was extended because of the kind of complexity of looking at our properties to the 12th.
Okay. So that money, where would that money go if that was collected?
I think it's probably, we should see what actually comes in, the same kind of analysis to figure out how to allocate it.
Okay. From my perspective, those two areas probably will bear us the biggest potential of revenue that we can look at in this budget. Collecting, not all delinquent taxes, not just real estate, all delinquent, and fixing the assessments. Those are the two big pieces.
And, as you know, we're aggressively going after each of those.
It's great. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Walter Spencer. Here's a guy helping OPA, right, for free. For free.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
A few more, then you have to tell me when my time is up, but I have a few more questions, if that's okay. Keep going. Just curious, on the 20 years ago, is there someone who can tell me, I'm curious to know the number of employees in the city 20 years ago, broken down by management and employees versus today?
I think we have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
I understand the question.
Here's my
It's
concern.
actually something we were already talking about doing, so.
Yeah. Here's why I say that question. I'll just put it out there. I think what happens in most governments is that when the chief executive officer says to a department, we need to save $2 million, they don't cut themselves, they cut the employees. And I think that needs to be looked at. Do we have the final number for the Pope visit as to what it actually cost us? That's one question.
So the cost was $16.8 million. The reimbursements were $8.4 million.
Is that the final? So it costs us about $8 million?
Yes.
Okay. At the DNC, we had the briefing, I know, in the mayor's office, and I asked a question. They said the worst case was $700,000 for the DNC. Is that still the worst case?
That's, I think, the latest we've seen. All the security costs were covered, and there were non-security costs that were in that range.
Because if that's the case, I have to commend you guys. Did a good job on that. That's pretty good. What strategies or methods are we exploring or utilizing in order to continue to reduce the number of vacancies, especially for the police, Department of Public Health, Department of Parks and Rec, who make up 60% of the vacant positions?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably an HR question more than our question.
Because those are areas that we should probably focus on.
Right, and I know that they're working on it, but I couldn't give you a good answer.
Here's the question, and I want you to give us your opinion on this one. Comparable cities that have stronger than average credit ratings, higher than us, tend to have more robust legal mandate requirements, I call them handcuffs, or stronger internal policies. Have we considered implementing more robust legal mandate requirements or stronger internal policies? For example, I think we have some numbers that say at a certain level of reserves, it's 0.75. Have we looked at possibly raising that? And I say this in this respect, even as an individual, you know, I was always taught save before you spend. And so the concept of saying to us, maybe City Council enacts it, says, hey, 5% of our budget must go into reserves. That's just that's the rule. Have you had any thoughts on that or suggestions?
I mean, it's really kind of a matter of where people see the trade-off between healthier long-term fund balance and probably making cuts in the short term.
Right. But also, but if we collect the delinquent taxes and fix the commercial assessments, may not have to do that.
Thank you, Councilman.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. With respect to that, Councilman, real quick, I know I'm not jumping the line, but I know there's been a conversation over a period of time about having a rainy day fund and a number of other initiatives, and at the end of the day, I mean, you have to have the political will and have the political discipline to say, we're going to do this and we're going to make sure that we maintain this level. There are obviously some issues relating to our situation versus other municipalities, and you look down into the details with respects to costs associated with our workforce versus Phoenix, which is quite different with respects to the poverty levels, and I know there are some municipalities have high poverty rates, but there are a lot of factors that go into that, but at the end of the day, if people decide that, you know, we're going to have a reserve fund or maintain a certain level of fund balance, then these are the people. Mayor's not here, but at the end of the day, if that's what we decide we're going to do, you know, this is the place that it happens. So that should probably be a conversation as we move ahead. Yeah. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kiona-Sanchez.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I wanted to follow up on some of the questions of Councilwoman Darrell Parker, because we've been talking about the zero-based performance program-based budgeting for a long time, and the budget director mentioned there would be 15 departments. Can you share with us how departments will be prioritized to determine where we should start?
Yes, so we picked the departments by going through a bit of a process about what we thought departments could be ready for and which ones made sense to start off with as kind of the first round. We want to be able to do everyone eventually, but we knew that in the first year of doing this, we honestly couldn't get to do everyone. So we made some of the recommendations about which ones we started off, partly by working with the departments themselves to say, there are some departments like, for example, the newly created Office of Planning and Development, where there's a lot of work that they're having to do just to reconfigure their office structure altogether, that this timing of doing this for the FY18 budget
So you took the easiest one. Can you give me what is the priority?
So I can tell you which ones we're planning on working with, although it, as we go through this process, it could change. So Streets Department, Revenue Department, Managing Director's Office, Finance Department, Pensions, City Treasurer, Records, Chief Administrative Officer, Fleet Management, Procurement, Commerce, Aviation, City Rep.
What percentage of the budget do these departments represent?
Some of these are large departments, so we include the Fire Department, that's a pretty large department, L&I, which is a large department, Health, which is a large department, and so we've got a range of kind of both large and small, because I think we wanted to make sure that we got to a significant number of departments that had a range of different challenges. So for us, one of the challenges that we have to work through are how do we include grant-funded, the grants fund generally as part of a program-based budget, and so we wanted to choose departments that gave us that kind of challenge to figure out, like the Health Department. We wanted some large departments like Streets and L&I, as well as having kind of the smaller departments so we could see how this worked. One of the big focus on the program-based budgeting is also performance metrics, to be able to have clear and useful performance metrics to be able to evaluate how well the program is doing. And so we wanted to choose departments that had kind of a wide range of metrics so that we could sort of test how well this is going to work. But we also knew that we couldn't bite off more than we could chew, and if we wanted to do this well, we had to focus only on sort of, we couldn't do everyone, so we have chosen not to do departments like DHS, because I think that was a large department that I think we just didn't think internally we had the capacity to handle, but we wanted to do the health department because it does have a similar kind of structure in terms of grants. The fire department actually asked if they could be included this year. We originally thought that we might use them in the FY19 budget process, but the commissioner actually requested to opt into the program-based budget process because he felt that would help him as he's looking at all of his operations and how it's structured and what they needed to do. So because we have to get everybody geared up to propose the budget in 18, or at least as many departments as we could, the process involves them not only choosing which of the programs, but they have to go and reallocate their FY16 actuals, the FY17 adopted budget, and the new estimates into these programs. And that process itself takes a little bit of work because you have to then go back and say, okay, this position, it previously was included in this division, and now we want to move it into this program. And so that in itself is a fairly time-intensive process. So we knew that we couldn't do everyone in that time, because that also takes a lot of, there's only 6 people in the operating budget, so being able to use their time effectively to be able to help departments through this, we were really conscious of that. So that's like, and I can set up a separate briefing if that would be helpful with you and the council.
Talks about the ability to have a 1% or 2% departmental shift in case of, given the fund balance situation. Have you established any preliminary goals about where the department should be as part of this process in terms of savings?
Are you talking about the target budget process? Mm-hmm. So I think we'll probably be sending out target budgets in the next couple of weeks, and we're working through exactly what those preliminary numbers should be. We have we're trying to be thoughtful about how we do this, that we get the savings that we need for the budget without having a detrimental effect on services. So we're working with departments to come up with what we think is a reasonable number that we get the real savings that we need to include in the budget without having a significant detrimental impact on services. I think in that regards, we're trying to avoid any class 100 reductions. I think during the budget process this year...
How about the overtime, since that's been identified as the problem? Is there any goal setting around the
Yes, and we included that in the budget, and one of the things that the Managing Director's Office in particular is paying very closely attention to their department, to his departments that particularly had overtime reductions, and their all departments are now required to submit quarterly reports about how well they're managing their overtime, and we're tracking it closely internally to make sure that they are meeting their overtime targets.
So the departments who are piloting the performance-based budgeting and looking at their class 100 and the overtime, things that we've identified in terms of monitoring, because one of the issues around overtime, particularly with some of the departments, is kind of the same individuals, right? Has been reported in the paper. So what are we doing around that? Looking at, because in some cases, the same kind of people shoot to the top.
And I think that's a sort of a management issue related to how the commissioner manages their departments and how they allocate and distribute overtime. I'm not sure that's something that we in budget or finance really would have control over.
Performance-based budgeting is around that. So
Well,
the issue is,
it is-
if that's been publicly identified as an issue, I hate for us to go through this process and then we're faced with another press coverage with the same 15, 20 people making 3 times their salary for overtime.
Yeah, I think we would see it by the program rather than just by the department. We'll see overtime by program, but I don't think we will get to a point where we're showing the overtime by individual person within the program-based budget. That's just kind of not how we track it. We look at the total spend, particularly kind of look at total class 100, their total personnel spend, and make sure that they stay within their budgeted amount for those things, and the mix between overtime, clearly want to manage overtime as carefully as possible, but sometimes the mix between overtime and the just regular personnel spend varies, because if they're having challenges hiring or there are other issues that requires that balance.
So the issue of departments' inability to reduce overtime while we're still hiring up is also another performance management.
Yes.
My concern is that, overtime sometimes is used to compensate certain people. And so if that is not put as part of the matrix, given the public criticism that departments have received, then how are we going to manage it? If they can hide it in the package of overtime, as opposed to why is it that these people rise to the top year after year after year? And so, part of performance-based is like, why is that person the person that has to make 3 times his salary or twice his salary?
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, I don't think that we in the budget office are going to be able to we don't have the resources to go line by line.
Part of the performance-based is being able to manage that.
Yeah,
and if we're using overtime to compensate people because we can't do salary adjustments and stuff like that, there has to be something, because that's part of the managing of the budget, something that you give or expect of department heads, otherwise it's going to continue to happen. They're just going to get smarter about how they hide it.
And I think kind of the first thing that Ann said is that we'd expect commissioners to manage that, which is why the managing director's made it clear to his reports that one of the ways they're going to be judged is on their management of overtime. So they'll be required to reduce that overtime. So I think for them, him and for us, seeing the total overtime number is really what matters. Then if we saw cases, for whatever reason, of people where it looked like there was abuse, we would kind of zero in on that to try to make sure that abuse didn't happen.
Okay, I don't want to manipulate the time. I think you didn't put a stop time on me, but there's other lights, so.
Yeah, actually, when we gave the authorization for Councilman Dom to continue his line of questioning, we didn't anticipate such a robust participation level by our colleagues, so now the board is full. But to be fair, I think the people that are teed up for the first time should get, an equally lengthy conversation, and then after that, we're going to have to go back on the clock. All right, is that okay with my good friends and colleagues? Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Just have some questions and some thoughts regarding the information that was presented, and it's this conversation we're having here today. From my understanding, that in the coming years, the school district is going to be in a pretty significant financial situation, and considering the current state of our fund balance, how do you see us dealing with that issue in our fund balance going forward?
So I guess the district, I haven't seen updated numbers from the district since the state budget was done, so I don't know kind of how that changes the numbers, but I do think that within a couple of years, they'll have severe financial problems if nothing more changes at the state funding level. And I think we probably need to see how that plays out before we determine what we're going to do locally. But it does seem like something that we would not be able to handle from our fund balances. It doesn't seem like it's not something we can handle from our fund balances.
Right. But it's going to put additional pressure on all of the city resources, which, considering that the level that our fund balance currently is, even any ideas, suggestions we have going forward, it's going to inhibit those because we're going to have to deal with a pretty significant financial issue for the school district.
Right, so there were changes that happened at the state level this year that helped. So, other things could happen at the state level, before we get to that point with the district.
From your experience, and you've been in this role for 2 administrations, also previously a budget director under former Mayor Street, and a number of cities are dealing with the same issue of unfunded pension liabilities. But what are some of the other ideas or thoughts you've been hearing from either colleagues or others throughout the country on how to address some of these issues?
Yeah, I think the most common are kind of similar to the kind of things we've done, which is trying to find additional resources to put into the plan, or to look at changes in benefit structure, both of which we've done. Really, if you look at it, there are two sides to pensions. There are your kind of assets and your liabilities, and you either kind of try to reduce the liabilities in the long term or increase your assets, and we've tried to do both.
You must be reading my notes because I'm talking two sides of the ledger, because that's often the challenge, that we spend a lot of time on the money going out and trying to track the money going out, and also trying to bring more money in, especially some of the initiatives that have been happening over the past couple of years from collections. But in your testimony, you talked about growing the economy, and I think that's something that, from my observation over the past number of years, we as a city have not done a good enough job in trying to grow the economy, especially from a small business perspective. From my observation, from a procurement perspective, I've heard it stated by various individuals that, for example, our procurement department focuses just on buying widgets and wrenches and does not focus on economic development. But we as a city, when we're looking to procure goods and services, granted, we've got to get the best quality product that we can, but we don't look at how we can do that locally. And that, by doing that, helps to grow our local business, our local economy. So as we go into the discussion regarding rebuild, what type of much more aggressive way are we going to look at in trying to growing the base of our economy from a small business development perspective?
So I know that is kind of a high priority of the Commerce Director. I also know that the rebuild folks are focusing on that, but I don't know the details well enough to give you a good answer.
Well, I guess my concern is that, we too often think in silos, and I think this needs to be a much more integrated process, not just looking at how we are monitoring the finances, but how we grow the finances of our city. And so, going forward, I think we need to have much stronger integration of what is our business development growth strategy as we grow the base of dollars in the city, as well as how we monitor the dollars that we spend. And I think that's something, yes, we need to look at our pension issues, we've got to look about some of our other issues, but we also have to do a much stronger growth in how we look at our economy. When you look at Philadelphia compared to Boston, other cities on the eastern seaboard, we're woefully under from a jobs perspective. And I think that's something that, from my experience, I don't want to just point out this administration, but the past number of administrations really has not had that type of small business development focus on how we grow the base of successful businesses in our city, because it replicates in every area of our economy. If a small business on Woodland Avenue or King Sessing or Frankfurt Avenue, if they grow, they're going to be able to hire more employees from the community, which puts more dollars into the neighborhood, which also allows someone to possibly buy a home or invest more dollars into their existing home, which is more money for the school district. So I think these things are very all interconnected, but we too often focus on them in just silos. And I think, although the purpose of this hearing, from my understanding, is focusing on the dollars and how we're spending those, but you also talk about growing the economy, and I just want to make sure that going forward, we're having much more stringent focus on business development as a way to grow revenues in the city.
And I think that is happening, and I think particularly, for the Commerce Director, I think that's a really high priority.
One last point, you talked about in the end of your testimony regarding tax structure, and I know one of the challenges I've seen for a number of businesses is not only the concerns and complaints we've heard about the tax structure in our city. Many of us have read the Pew report, and there's been different opinions on that report, but what are we doing from an internal perspective to make it easier for business owners to pay taxes in the city and to actually work within the city on doing the various things that we require businesses to do as they operate in our city?
So in terms of making it easier, ask the Revenue Commissioner to come up and talk about that.
I think in terms of trying to make things easier for taxpayers to pay their taxes, we're kind of hitting it from a couple fronts. One is we've offered some tax relief and done that in the forms from the BERT tax of the exemption, the $100,000 exemption. So we've allowed those taxpayers that would have minimal tax due, they basically do not have to pay anymore. So I think that took about 60,000 filers or payers out of the roll there and allowed them to just file returns. So I think that was helpful. In other terms of relief, we've increased outreach to try to make, and we're continuing to do that. We have a big rollout for this year as well to make taxpayers aware of the different programs that exist. So, Homestead, Loop, UPA. We're working right now on our analyzing our business tax agreements and the criteria for those, and we want to make those standardized and more public, so taxpayers know that if they have delinquencies, they can come in and what they can do to pay their taxes easily. We've added kiosks in the concourse that make it easier for taxpayers to come in and make it more efficient, their waiting time more efficient. One of the features that the kiosk will have, I don't think it's fully operational yet, is from a smartphone, a taxpayer, or from a computer, a taxpayer can make an appointment to come in and see a tax rep, and then if they're delayed coming in for their appointment, they can delay the time so that they can hold their spot in line. So we're doing that. So we're really trying to be customer focused. There's a new website coming up, so there'll be more information there. So we're trying to just reach out and make taxpayers aware of their liabilities and what they can do to satisfy them.
I'm aware of a number of those initiatives. I guess my concern is that, over the years, we've had a lot of different initiatives to try to help businesses in the city, but what type of real resources are we dedicating to those initiatives so people throughout the city are very familiar with them? When you look in the private sector context, and granted we don't have the resources like a Citizens Bank or Wells Fargo, there's a reason why a Wells Fargo based on the Stagecoach or Citizens Bank based on the colors being green and white, and too often we don't really devote the real resources to let people know about these programs. Now I know it's a balance because you have a number of things that we're trying to do in the city of Philadelphia, but it's an investment that to me makes sense that we need to make, because by making a more critical investment, I think we get a better return when more people know about these initiatives. Having them is great, and saying get the word out is good, but I think we need to make a stronger commitment as we go into the budget process going to next year, making more resources available so people really know about these initiatives.
And in that vein, we're bringing a person in shortly, within the next few weeks, that will lead that initiative. There'll be a director, basically, of our relief programs, and they will be assigned with the outreach. So all of the outreach will now be under one person, and will be, and we think that'll make it better coordinated and more efficient and more successful. And that'll start, as I said, in a few weeks.
I'll conclude my questions at this point, because I know other people have questions to ask.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Breslin. Commissioner, you could hang around for a moment if you would. Don't go so quickly. Always a pleasure to see you. But I had a couple of questions, actually.
Sure.
Going directly to Councilman Green's line of questioning in terms of collection, because I think that one of the things that got us to this point is we have a reputation of doing a pretty miserable job of collecting in the city of Philadelphia. Now, I know you and I have talked about and debated on this matter quite a bit, and you said that the collection in the city was around 90% or 95% or something like that.
Yeah, it depends on the tax, but on real estate tax, it's above 92% collections within the first year.
Okay. Does that include what is handled by collection agencies?
Yes.
So that includes collection?
That's everything that comes in within the year of the billing. So the bill goes out within 1 year, that captures 92% of that comes in, and if that had gone out to a collection agency, that would be included in there.
Okay, because I really see a critical component to moving us or upgrading our position as enhanced collection. And I know that, again, we've talked about some of the reforms that you had planned to put into place, and I know that you gave Councilman Green an overview of some of those items, but I think if you wouldn't mind discussing that in a little bit further detail, just because if we want to address this issue, we really do have to do something about the way we collect money in Philadelphia. We really have allowed it to get completely out of control, and what we are seeing now as a result of that. And so, and not that it all started on your watch, we certainly understand that, but if you could talk a little bit more about collection and what we do. And one of my main concerns is sort of the arbitrary nature of collection in the Revenue Department right now. We talked about it in previous hearings, in which, there can be a decision made in terms of whether my down payment deposit, whatever, is acceptable to begin a collection agreement or an agreement with the City of Philadelphia, so that I can, be in good tax standing. But it really depends on whoever I receive, in the Revenue Department, what their thought is. It's not standardized. And I don't know if the new person that you're bringing in, if that's their intention, that they will standardize the operation of the Revenue Department?
They would not. The person we're bringing in would be dedicated to relief programs, so,
Okay.
and putting that outreach and help us with not only the outreach, but then the monitoring of the statistics, how many people take advantage of them, and how we're improving in that area. What we've done since we talked during the budget process about the payment agreements is as I said, we were doing an analysis, and we're continuing to do the analysis right now of our business payment agreements. Some of them, depending on what type of payment agreements you're talking about, some are more standardized than others. UPA is the most standard. Everything's public, everything's, so they're on real estate tax. So we wanted to take a look at business tax. We're doing that now. We've put a working group together that's beginning to look at the data and beginning to, with a goal of standardizing those agreements and putting that out there so that when a taxpayer comes in, they know what our standard payment agreements are, they know how much of a down payment, what the term is. And as soon as we have a draft of that, we'd be happy to share that with you.
Is that going to be just for businesses? Or?
We're going to start with businesses, but we're going to expand that, and that'll be the first phase, but we'll extend that through all of our payment agreements.
Okay. Because I think it's very, very important that let's say if I happen to come to Revenue and I have a outstanding balance and I want to pay it, and I don't have, if I owe $10,000 and I have $1,000, and you may say, well, that 1,000 is acceptable, and Rob may say, well, that 1,000 isn't enough, you need 1,500 or you need 2,000. You're going to defer to him. Okay, very good. But that there is one policy across the board, so no matter which person I talk to, I'm getting the exact same information.
Right.
And so I really just can't say enough the importance of making sure that we do that and expeditiously. Like that has to be much more of a priority in terms of making the Revenue Department operate more efficiently. And so, do you have a timeline in terms of when you expect that will be?
I don't. The working group has just been formed. As I said, we just completed looking at the data. So it would be premature for me to put any timeline out there. I don't want to put them under that pressure. They haven't reported back of what that'll take.
Can you give us some sort of an idea?
But definitely it's a high priority, and it would be, and my goal would be, it would be before the end of the calendar year.
Within the calendar year?
Yes.
Within 6 months?
Yes. For the business tax, the piece we're working on now, yes.
Okay.
We should have a draft out in that timeframe.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Sir?
I'm on the first round time clock.
Yes, sir.
All right, okay, just checking. I won't need any of that. So I've been listening to the conversations of my colleagues, and they're very insightful and have me thinking in a number of directions. And one of the things that we go through as an elected official, when we're thinking about seeking this job is SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So strength, to me, seems to be that our economy is improving. The question becomes, is it a strength that our real estate is increasing in value? And if so, on the strength side, how much, and what does that project to the future?
So it is, we project about 3% a year growth in the real estate tax. And I think here will testify that he thinks the number could be a lot larger. But
if we consider Dom's reassessment issue, yes, a lot higher.
Right. But yeah, so we built in some numbers to the plan, and I hope that they are higher, and we have some strength for that in our plan.
So we're still undervalued compared to New York and Washington.
So we believe our commercial properties are undervalued, and we're doing a full assessment of that this year.
Okay. So weakness. Weakness is in our collections, and we still have an outstanding balance of non-collected real estate revenue outside of the city. Have we improved on our collections of those individuals that own properties in Philadelphia yet pay their taxes in their respective townships in Pennsylvania? We talked about going after that. We talked about improving that.
Right. So I actually think collections are kind of moving to being a strength, and I'm saying that to allow Frank to come back to the table.
Frank saw me.
Yeah.
But I really want to focus on not just collections in general, because I kind of understand that we need to invest in those predictive dollars and all of that good stuff that we talked about. But what I really want to go after, the fish that I want to catch, is the person who has the audacity to own city-owned property, pay their taxes in Upper Dublin, but won't pay for things here. And how are we going after that?
So, we've worked to identify who they are. So I have some numbers here that, of our real estate tax delinquents, 87% list a Philadelphia mailing address. Another 7% list a Pennsylvania address other than Philadelphia. I think that's the group you're talking about right now. So, and then there's another 6% that list a mailing address that's outside of Pennsylvania.
How much is that real money?
I don't have the dollars in front of me, I don't believe, but I can get that to you. I have that breakdown.
Give me a guess.
9% of the delinquency is out-of-towners.
9% of the delinquency is out-of-towners.
So we can take big bites out of groups of people that we can target. And those are available folk that we need to focus on. Because as we start to lose houses to sheriff sales and things like that, if we have not gone after those big fish that thumb their nose at us, I feel a little guilty going after the small people that we can get because they can't go anywhere. So that's, to me, a weakness. And opportunity is what my colleagues Green and Parker talked about, is the economic development plan to increase the pie of taxables in the city of Philadelphia. And that needs to include your Commerce Department to talk about what we're doing on our waterfront, to talk about what we're doing in our vacant industrial complexes such as Hunting Park and other places like that, to come up with a strategy to get occupants that are actually taxpayers. So that's an opportunity. The threat that I just heard from my colleague about the Sterling Act, that scares the out of me, because it bifurcates that, it stops the bifurcation of that wage tax rate so that it benefits people living in the city as opposed to living elsewhere, and we need to be very mindful of that, because that also speaks to your two-pronged approach of real estate assessment, commercial versus residential rates, because if they pull the Sterling Act on one, they will pull the Sterling Act on the other. So we really need to have our legal team.
Yes, agree, that's a major threat.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you give a little bit of update on CAMA and what the status is of that project? I know that this was an issue that a number of us in council wanted to keep close tabs on.
Yep. I'm going to ask Saskia Thompson, who's the project manager for CAMA, to come up and discuss that.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Saskia Thompson with the Finance Department.
Could you maybe just start with just a very brief description of what CAMA is for anybody who might be watching?
Sure. So essentially, it's the software program that helps us automate the tax assessment process, keeping a steady database of all of the parcels, what they were valued at last year, and helps us model what they'll be valued at in coming years.
And it's meant to help standardize assessments as well. So
Help standardize the process that we use to assess properties going forward.
And it should help us, allow us to more quickly move towards a more annualized assessment as opposed to waiting a really long time between.
Absolutely, because right now, the way the process is done, it's very manual, it's very paper-based. It takes the staff a long time to move through that process, and this will help us do it more consistently and more quickly. So we were in the process of negotiating with a vendor. Unfortunately, I thought we had resolved most of the issues, but we ran into a problem with timing where they weren't going to be able to start for at least another 2 years, which is beyond the timeline that was acceptable to us. So we are in the process of looking at another vendor. We hope to have that process wrapped up by the end of the year so that we can kick off sometime in 2017, but there's definitely a delay over what we thought we would be doing this time last year.
When did negotiations begin with the vendor that was awarded the contract?
I would say it was, off the top of my head, I'd have to consult my notes, but I think it was about a year ago, and we were pretty much done, and then about 3 months ago, we just had to start over.
So, this is a concern, obviously. Many of us were asking about the CAMA contract last spring, wanting to see whether it was the best way to move forward on annualized assessments. Have you gotten some feedback about whether there are any internal issues with the vendor, or do you really feel like this was just you were duped, or the vendor was not? 2 years is a significant delay. I can't imagine that was not part of the contract, I assume.
No, we had not signed the contract yet. We thought we were headed in that direction, and then they said that they had a number of their existing projects were running over time schedule, and they had another big project in their pipeline, and they felt like they couldn't give us the time that we would need to get our project up and running until those things had resolved. And that was not what we were led to believe would happen when we first started talking to them, and because they couldn't give us a commitment of when that would actually start, we felt like it would be safer for us and more prudent for us to pick another vendor, which is what
What
we're
was
doing
the
now.
original timeline for the contract? I mean, when was the contract expected to be up and running?
We thought we would be starting in January of 17, calendar
2017.
17.
Okay, and that the vendor would have concluded and we would have been online with the assessments by what time?
We thought we would have gone live with the actual product in around July of 2018.
Right.
How that works with the assessment calendar is a little bit more complicated. We would be using parts of it sooner, but essentially we wouldn't have the full system up until July of 2018.
And that maybe residents might receive notices of any changes in assessments around July, is that right? That process will begin in July 2018?
Right, but because the system wouldn't have been up until July of 18, then the values that we're using that system completely would be values that came out after that.
Okay, so then that, we're looking at 2019?
Correct.
Right. So if you are you rebidding the contract, or you already are in
We already
negotiations
have,
with the current
and we
vendor?
received our bids, I believe, 2 weeks ago, and we are reviewing those now. We still have a strong candidate or two in the mix, and we'll be negotiating with those vendors immediately.
And what is the timeline now for CAMA? Has it been pushed back because of this glitch?
It has been pushed back, and I can't give a definitive date until I've really engaged a vendor, but we hope to have those negotiations wrapped up still by the
How
end of the
much
year.
is it being pushed back, in your estimation?
We are hoping that it's no more than a 6-month delay in start, but again, I will definitely have a more definitive date when we have an agreement with the vendor.
And this is housed under the finance department?
Correct.
Is that right? How does, I'm sorry, I forget the department. How is Rebecca Reinhardt's department interfacing with this project?
We are managing essentially the implementation process, but OIT, which is a department that is underneath Rebecca Reinhardt, is a strong partner. They have staff dedicated to this project like they do all of our IT projects.
They're technology experts, for example, that
Absolutely.
they deal with software, they deal with vendors, they are able to do project management on this. Is
Yes.
that right?
And they have, they're part of the steering committee, they'll have all of their architecture people reviewing the product, they'll be part of the implementation through the entire process.
Does finance normally handle software
It's not
program or
unusual.
project management at this level? Is this
Yes.
standard?
Yes.
Is this the biggest, I mean, the CAMA contract is roughly how much money?
I just want to answer your question, that these projects in general are about work process changes as much as technology. So usually kind of the operating department does manage it and works closely with the IT folks, and that's what's happening in this case.
But could you feel like, I'm sorry, maybe I'm not understanding what you mean by work process. I'm trying to understand, how is it that the CAMA contract comes under finance as opposed to maybe being under Rebecca Reinhardt's purview, for example?
So essentially, I guess the contract itself is still an IT contract because we're contracting with an IT software vendor, and that's consistent. That's the way we generally do things. But in terms of managing the implementation, we are managing it because it's essentially a business. It's IT software, but it's just to automate a business process, which OIT cannot do for us. So they are there because it's an IT implementation, but we are managing it because essentially it's about making our businesses operate more smoothly and efficiently.
So I won't, I think that we want to keep close tabs on this, obviously. The most recent round of real estate tax assessments was in 2012 or 2013?
That's the most recent round of citywide.
Right.
But there have been assessments each year. So we did the land reassessment,
Yep.
the process just concluded. We're doing the commercial assessments in the year coming up, and then after that, we're going to do citywide reassessment, whether CAMA's in place or not.
I mean, I think that you know this, obviously, many of us on city council remain of the belief that our city's wealth is in our land and in growing tax bases, and as new people come in, and, the powerful opportunities that can be, approximated if we are vigilant and up-to-date and current. But this glitch that we have with the contract pushes us back close to 2020. And we are now moving up on 7 years in a robust time period of massive expansion within the city. And I guess what I'm wondering is what impact, I feel like it can't help but have a significant impact, not only on city revenues, but potential school district revenues as well. And, I just remain concerned about how your division is looking at this, and is there any way to address the kind of consistent pushback on the timeline of this contract?
So I'll let Saskia talk about the timeline, but in terms of its impact, we're still going to move ahead with reassessments, even without CAMA fully in place. So we will be doing the commercial reassessment this year and then full reassessment next year, regardless of the timeline with CAMA. CAMA will make the process easier and it'll make it more efficient, but you can still do a reassessment without CAMA.
Yeah. I mean, our hope obviously is that we would have moved to annualized assessments as opposed to major efforts every 4 years.
And our plan is to do them every year. That's our plan.
But we can't realistically do that without CAMA.
We can. I mean, it's a much more work, but I think the way the CAMA schedule works, it probably would be ready in kind of what the second year of our annual reassessments would be.
Okay. My second question is a little bit about the Pew report that's been mentioned a couple of times. And I know that, obviously there's been some discussion about the incredible growth around tax incentives and exemptions that are made in the period, say, 2001 to 2012. And PICA has called on us to kind of evaluate the cost of, whether the cost of a number of these incentives, how it relates to benefits. And I'm wondering how finance is cooperating with PICA to do some sort of analysis on that.
Right. So there are some where it's kind of relatively straightforward. If it's a job creation program and you can tell the number of jobs it creates. One of the things that the Commerce Director and I have talked about is in kind of any job creation effort we're going to make, any investment that we're going to make as we move forward, that we'll do an analysis to understand the tax revenue implications of whatever incentive we're giving, to see whether those taxes pay for whatever incentive we're providing. So that's our plan as we move forward on any of these programs.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing for me personally is I'm not interested in looking backwards. I think that, it's good to recognize that and keep that in mind. My interest is as we move forward. And, I think that this city is a different place than it was in 2001. We're clearly in a new phase of growth, and there are new opportunities to define both cost and benefit, for example. But I'm wondering if you're looking at that on a project-by-project basis. Are you looking at that in terms of broad categories of tax exemptions or tax incentives? How are you kind of doing this analysis? And do you expect to see any significant kind of adjustments that you could envision?
So I think that's what we'll kind of find out as we go along. And I think probably different programs will have different analyses. Some, for example, if we are deciding whether to provide a straight subsidy to a business, we can kind of measure the cost of that subsidy and against whatever job pledge they're making and how much their average pay is, and then what the wage tax revenue from that is. So, I mean, that's the kind of analysis that we want to do as we...
But you want to do that on a project-by-project basis as opposed to like categorical?
So it depends. If one is on a specific project, we look at that. If we were proposing a new incentive, then we would look at it, incentive-wide. It depends on what's being proposed.
Right. I mean, I think just ad-lib for a little bit, and then I have one last very quick question. But I I am a little cautious about the project-by-project approach. I think that any individual entity can always make a pitch about value. I hope that maybe we could work with finance to think a lot about categorical impacts, like whether the tax abatements or other types of things have a need to remain in the categories that they are and in their current form, as opposed to just looking at things from just as they come up. Because I think it gets complicated, it's hard to work with in a very narrow setting, and every business honestly deserves it, and, you know, all this kind of stuff, if we kind of go at it in that fashion. But if there's space to really think about things in a much more broad categorical way, I think that's important.
Yeah, there is, and we're happy to have those discussions.
And then my last question is whether you could give a little bit of update on the Philadelphia Parking Authority first quarter money, as specifically we know that there have been some concerns about money going towards the school district, but has there been any impact in terms of first quarter reporting about trends that you're seeing with the PPA in terms of city money delivery?
Yeah, so in looking at parking authority money, actually it was for the end of last year.
They just finished the first quarter, right?
Yeah. It looks like, and they're looking at this to try to understand why, looks like we would be receiving less money than we anticipated.
Do you know how much we're down in the first quarter?
Was it
2.5 million, I think.
There's a couple of million, and they're trying to understand kind of what's happening and why, and they're supposed to be getting back to us on that.
And do you have ongoing conversations about whether this money is projected to grow over the course?
That's what, so they think that it's going to reverse itself and be okay by the end of the year, but we're still waiting to have more discussions about it.
And the school district is at the table with those discussions?
Yes, the school district comes to all of our meetings with Parking Authority.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Just for the record, I know we don't have a clock, but we do have two individuals on the next panel that are from out of town, and they have to catch a train, so read through the lines. Next up, Councilman sorry.
Thank you very much, Council President. The financial condition of the city of Philadelphia, I'm sorry, I was at a meeting, so I wasn't here during your testimony, but in summary, good, bad?
So I think what we said is that our fund balance is lower than that of our peers, and we think it should be higher, and that we have a significant challenge with our unfunded pension liability. So I think we have some substantial challenges. They're not insurmountable, but we have real challenges with our finances.
Okay, so the city's budget practices are usually 1 year, 4 years, and then 5 years. 1 year, 4 years.
Well, we have to do a 5-year plan every year.
Right. And if you were to look at the health of the city financially over 10 years, would you categorize it differently than you just did?
Do you mean the prior 10 years?
No, the upcoming 10 years.
So I think there was a reason that the kind of framers of the PICA Act made 5-year plans. So I think each year when you go out, the numbers become kind of less and less reliable. So if you looked at numbers 9 or 10 years from now, I'm not sure they'd be as reliable, and that's kind of why we look at the 5-year time frame.
Okay, I have said critically that, you know, my problem with this is that we know things are coming up, such as the $600 million deficit of the school district, the conclusion of the wage tax, the PICA portion, which you have said would cut a hole in our budget by $350 million per year, and that happens around 2021, 2023. We feel it in 2024, which is outside of the budgeting process, and it's actually at the start of a new mayoral term, because, you know, this mayor cannot serve for more than 8 years. So there doesn't appear to be any planning of what happens when these financial major problems are kind of on our radar.
So our understanding from the law department is that even if the PICA Act goes away, that tax we can control locally, because it's just, would be a portion of the wage tax. So there is local control over what would happen with that tax rate. So it's something that, we, or you as elected officials, can make sure doesn't happen.
And could you clarify again about this, I guess, proposal in Harrisburg to bifurcate our taxes and cap the commercial at 15%? Has the administration taken a clear position against that?
No. The administration has taken a position in favor of being able to bifurcate the property tax.
Yes.
So that you could tax commercial rates at different rates from residential.
Yes.
And we think that would allow us to take a look at our entire tax
Listen,
structure.
I agree
And
with
think,
that.
I just want to complete the answer.
Sure.
And I think kind of, and this is where the council president is too, the kind of key thing to that is where the details of it lie and what restrictions there are and aren't. So, but I think the concept really works.
Well, I think the details are critical. In other words, I don't think anybody disagrees that we should be able to, tax the commercial differently from the residential. The issue is that we have like 4 new super Class A buildings coming up, humongous buildings, $3.5 billion, all this stuff, that on a commercial lease basis would probably be higher than any other, leases that we've had. And so to be able to give a varying rate to the different levels of commercial buildings would be good, but then to put in the Constitution the wage tax cuts and other tax cuts that are locally created through the elective process, the administration does not have an opinion on that detail?
So I think the administration actually favors reducing the wage tax if we increase the commercial portion of the property tax.
Through a constitutional amendment, you favor that?
My understanding is the Constitution would give us the ability to do that. Wouldn't require us to, would give us the ability to make those 2 changes.
No, we could do that already.
Point of information. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're talking about having state authorization. Is that the state, I just want to be clear and everybody clear, I think we need state legislative authorization regardless of how the bifurcation or the uniformity clause is to be broken. I think the state needs to change the Constitution. Is that correct?
No, I don't think so.
Well,
That is correct. I'm sorry.
The issue is that there was obviously a lengthy conversation. I'm still not clear.
And not the details of like whether it's 15%, whether it's, or who, how does city council have the authorization to?
We don't have the authorization.
We do
under
not
the
have
current
the
bill.
authorization. That's
And we will not have the authorization under the
Exactly.
current bill, under the proposed bill, which is why I have personally.
I don't want it to fall on this body.
No,
Given authorization.
and that's
for
why-
the bifurcation of any state uniformity clause.
Nah, this is a constitutional amendment that requires one thing. And we don't have the flexibility to do what you referenced in the earlier part of your response to that question, if enacted.
If enacted, it gives us the ability to choose whether to increase commercial. It doesn't require us to increase it. It gives us the ability. But then we
It
have
enables
to,
us to do that, but it
Right.
is clearly focused. The concerns that were raised in the original version, where the Constitution mandated that if you in fact
You reduce
use the
the
enabling legislation, that language was simply put in the requirement for the state bill that gets passed. So it's no different than the earlier version. So this notion that somehow we changed the bill, they didn't change the bill. They basically put the same language in the earlier version. They put that and required that if the General Assembly passes legislation to enable us to do a bifurcation, it has to be
In the legislation
this way.
rather than the
Exactly. So
Constitution.
there's no difference, which is why it's, from our perspective, is problematic, because it does not give us the flexibility that we need to, as you said, have a broader tax discussion.
Yeah, the reason I brought it up is because while it's a kind of a theoretical thing, it does affect the taxes in the city. In other words, if we're going to increase commercial and we're forced to decrease wage tax outside the city as opposed to in the city, we reduce the overall amount of money when we need more money because of the $600 million the school needs, the $350 we're missing per year. It leaves us with the alternative of increasing residential real estate taxes. And then and then we get into this whole thing.
I think you combined two things.
Yeah.
The kind of movement to try to reduce the city portion of the non-residential is separate from this constitutional amendment question. That's a Sterling Act question where
Yes.
people are trying to take away our non-resident wage tax.
I do
And the
understand.
administration is
Yes.
opposed to that.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. What I'm saying is they're related. If there is a decrease in taxes through Harrisburg on the one hand, and therefore there's a decrease in taxes available to the city has to raise funds. It has to raise funds, it has limited choices. And my concern is that right now, the assessment of property in Philadelphia, in many cases, I know it's overall down, but in many cases has been high, especially commercial.
Has been what, sorry?
High. AVI has been high in many areas, and especially when you combine the overall increase in taxes, be it sodas, cigarettes, sales taxes, the cost of living in Philadelphia is high. And I know there's this new population moving in, but we have a large population of people on fixed income. We have a lot of people who are poor, living in some choice areas of the city, that their property taxes are going to continue to increase. And if the values keep going up and people can't afford to pay for it, then we're going to end up having a lot of people lose their homes, and we're going to transfer, property. We're going to have a new population. I mean, I don't think that's the goal of.
No, but I think that's why the ability to increase taxes just on commercial is attractive, and why we're doing the commercial reassessment this year, because we actually think that there are commercial properties that are undervalued more than that are overvalued, and that we can generate additional revenue by making that assessment more accurate.
I look at the large commercial buildings that are being built and the amount of money that is in those buildings and who's going to pay the leases. When I look at the overall commercial, I'm not sure. You add like the water runoff and all that stuff, a lot of commercial buildings, especially manufacturing and factories, large employees, they're actually, their property value may be high, but their profit margin is low in this city. So, I mean, how would you, because you raise one thing and you're chasing jobs out, and that's the thing that we're looking for. So how are you managing that?
So, I mean, I think it's important, as part of the discussion before, that assessments be accurate. And I think that there are a lot of commercial properties where the assessments are too low. I think that it's kind of a matter of fairness to capture that.
Okay. Well, I know I'm pressing here.
No, I'm a little concerned because we do have, and I know there are a lot of questions for the administration panel. What I was going to ask, if we can suspend that and let the two gentlemen from out of town come up and give their testimony, and if you guys can stick around, is it okay?
Sure.
Yeah, just because, we've invited.
I'll finish, Council
Well,
President.
the problem is you're not the only one. I mean,
Yes. Okay.
Well, are we the only one? Was that good? Okay, yeah, please, so we can just get, and we'll come back. Thank you. Who's here? All three? Thank you for your indulgence. Gentlemen, thank you so much, and thank you for hanging around. We appreciate your fact that you come down. This is a very important issue. This is at panel 2. This is the panel of financial advisors and analysts. Peter Nissen, Carl Jacob, and Matt Fabian. Am I correct?
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen. Do you have any testimony, or do you want to just be prepared? Are you prepared to just answer questions?
I expect that we're prepared to answer questions.
All right, we'll get right to
At
it.
the pleasure of the council.
All right, thank you. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for being here today. So you've gotten a flavor of the conversation today, and while we in the city of Philadelphia are very proud that we've been fiscally prudent over years, the simple reality is in municipal governments, too often our financial situation is based on the national trends and the international trends, and sometimes, regardless of whatever steps we take, legislatively or budget-wise, the broader picture impacts us. So we, in a very proactive way, would like to be prepared and to strengthen our existing conditions. So if you could just kind of just go down the line, and if you could just kind of tell me from your perspective what you think is good about our current condition and what you think we should be concerned about as it relates to the projections, as it relates to the economy generally, and then possibly as it impacts us locally.
Sure.
And if you can start by stating your name for the record and who you represent, or if you represent yourself, or you're with a particular company. Thank you.
Certainly, my name is Peter Nissen. I'm a managing director with the firm of Acacia Financial Group. We serve as a financial advisor to the city of Philadelphia with respect to its general obligation credits. In response to your question, all three of the rating agencies largely consider many of the same metrics in making an evaluation of an entity that they rate. The city is rated by the three primary rating agencies, Moody's, which you spoke a little bit about earlier in this testimony, Standard & Poor's Ratings Group, and Fitch Ratings. And all of them place the city's credit rating in roughly the same category, specifically in the single A category, although they do provide different gradations for that rating. In addition to their assessment of it, they also largely identify the same strengths and weaknesses. Among the strengths are the fact that the city of Philadelphia serves as a regional economic development engine, that the city takes a very proactive approach with respect to its efforts on budgeting and recording its ongoing financial position. There's a lot of credence that is given for the requirements under the PICA Act, both for the 5-year look forward obligation on a rolling basis, as well as the obligation to provide quarterly reports and updates on both the status and the projection for the year-end results there. They also provide a recognition of the value of the diversity of the employment that occurs here within the city and the strength of the eds and meds here within the city. Regarding some of the challenges, they all note the high level of poverty that is associated here in the city, the significant nature of the underfunded pension, and they also note the below average balance of the fund balance. This has been spoken about by a number of the other parties here today. The city's current percentage is in the range of 2% at the current time. The current 5-year plan has an anticipation of a declining fund balance that would lead to a fund balance amount of approximately only 1% of the city's annual revenues, which is by virtually any measure very low. To give you a little bit of a flavor of where some of the other rating agencies consider the metrics to be for stronger rated cities, Moody's places ratings in the 15 to 30% up in the higher echelon, while S&P is in the 8 to 15% range. So by any of the rating agencies, in addition to the GFOA and the city's own policy, the current balance is relatively low. And that's important not only as an objective measurement of one of the financial current positions of the city, but it's also serves as a buffer for the city in the event significant economic conditions are encountered again, including those that we've encountered very recently in 2009 and 2010. The smaller that the fund balance is, the greater that the severity of measures that will need to be undertaken in order to address that if there was economic downturn. It's important for the city to recognize that 60+% of the revenue that's generated within the general fund budget is economically based, is not cast in stone like the real estate revenue is. So it's important. Maybe I can pass it to my colleagues here to
Thanks. My name is Matt Fabian. I'm a partner at Municipal Market Analytics. And we haven't seen each other in quite a while, so. But we are an independent research firm, just so you guys know. We publish a commentary on the municipal bond market. It goes out to market participants, really, of all kinds. And I do a fair bit of talking about things regarding municipal bonds and state and local finance in the media as well. With respect to Philadelphia, I mean, the strengths, I think, you have had, fairly positive economic growth. You have a very professional management team, and as far as financial and economic disclosure, Philadelphia would be one of the strongest cities in America for providing information and materials to investors, which is increasingly important in the current financial market. With weaknesses, I mean, obviously, the lack of sizable budget reserves is a concern. It's not an abstract measure. To the extent the city lacks reserves and generally is, collects very economically sensitive taxes in a downturn, in a one-time event, a legal ruling, I mean, any kind of thing that could happen, the lack of a fund balance or rainy day fund, leaves the city very little to fall back on, and it implies that the city may once again resort to gimmicks and tricks and short-term budget strategies, like the pension obligation bonds or other sort of strategies that are that could quickly lead to more rating downgrades for the city. So even though in general things have been trending positively, you are vulnerable to rating downgrades. And the concern in particular, what makes investors a bit cautious about Philadelphia is that the rating is not, the credit profile is perhaps not quite as stable as you would like. Investors value predictability over almost anything else in the municipal bond market, because for the most part you want to buy a bond and hold it until it matures 10, 20 years from now, and you don't really have the time or incentive to spend a lot of time thinking about it. So the predictability with the city's very large interest rate swap exposure, those interest rate swaps have rating triggers. So to the extent your rating goes below a certain threshold, the swaps might terminate, might need to be restructured or renegotiated at terms less favorable to the city. So what it means is that if the city were to be downgraded, you could be downgraded not just one notch, but multiple notches because of that rating cliff related to interest rate swaps. So it makes investors more cautious about investing with the city, because you could go from a single A, solid credit like you are today, to below investment grade within a period of 2 or 3 years because of those swaps. So, and the pension funding is also a problem. So I'll pass it on.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carl Jacob. I'm an analyst at BondLink, which is a software firm that provides software packages for municipal disclosure. Prior to that, I worked for 18 years at S&P, and I was a Philadelphia analyst. And I go back when I was very young, I was a young analyst at Moody's when Mayor Rendell came in and the creation of PICA, so I have a little bit of history and sense of seeing all the city has gone through over the years, and I can speak to a little bit about that. I did do a rather lengthy presentation that you can take with you and read, and what it really delves into is aspects of credit that are important, the strengths the city has, the challenges the city has, and a little bit about oversight boards. I've seen through my almost 30 years of experience oversight boards that have worked well, some that have not worked well at all, and the fact that the city has been under PICA since the early 90s, that's something that I think has really helped stabilize what the market thought was a free-fall position the city was in during its cash crisis. That being said, the management teams I've seen over the years have managed on rather lean reserve levels, and rating agencies and investors look at reserve levels as an opportunity to understand the philosophy the city has in going in through economic cycles. So obviously, if you don't have that cushion there, you can run into problems when things turn. And also your ability to adjust to changing economic conditions are important factors too. I was the analyst for New York City, for DC, for Boston, for Pittsburgh. So I've seen DC where their structure, where the federal government intervened, requiring them to carry much higher balances, which in fact did help them during the slowdown. New York City, the crisis was, I was in grammar school when that crisis hit, so I wasn't able to witness that, but New York City's structure really allows it to move forward and not carry a high level of reserves, but to manage its resources in a way that they're able to react to any shortfalls almost instantaneously. So what I've heard here today and what I've witnessed myself are Philadelphia's strengths are obviously the economy. The perception of the economy has changed over the last 5 years with the stabilization of the population, with the poverty levels declining, with the movement into the center city. So that bodes well. You're creating a psychology that things are getting better, because don't forget, the economy is the engine that provides the ability to generate resources. So that's critical to rating agencies and investors. And I've seen the management team here react on issues that have come up. But again, the big stinger here is your lack of cushion for the unforeseen. And it was mentioned earlier that most cities in your peer group carry larger balances, carry reserve funds, have stabilization funds. The rainy day funds are there, and they use them when it rains. The key to that, to me, though, is not only to build that, but to have a mechanism in place that says, if you're going to draw on it, how are you going to replenish it? So you can give the markets confidence that you have a mechanism in place to rebuild balances. So those are some of the issues that I see that are out there. The pension, that's the hot topic in the municipal market nowadays, how it's being funded. I was the analyst at Moody's that did the pension bond rating in I think it was 1999. I'm really not that old, though, by the way. But that's the hot topic of the day, and what we've seen that some governments have done, and I've seen it here in Philadelphia, are attempts to chisel away at the liability by cooperating with unions in terms of givebacks, increased funding on contributions. New York City's done a number of tiers where new hires come into the pension at different benefit levels. I know City of Philadelphia has done some of that too. And then also one thing that you want to be able to do is to not have that liability explode. So the fact that the city is reducing its rate of return expectation will lend more predictability in the future and not have that liability balloon as the market doesn't meet those expectations. So that's really my opening statement.
All right, good. Let me ask you, you referenced 1999. I was actually, believe it or not, I was actually working here, and you said that you were new, relatively new. I was a young staffer back in those days when Rendell came around, right? Young is in quotes. In '99, we did, in fact, we issued a pension obligation bond, trying to lower pension unfunded liability. In some respects, I think that the belief was it was not necessarily effective because there was somewhat of a downturn in the economy. Is that something that you would not suggest? Not that we're talking about possibly doing that, but right now there's a team of people, a task force that are weighing all particular options. That particular bond would help reduce unfunded liability strategy, not something that would be recommended.
Please don't.
I didn't hear you.
Please don't.
Yeah, okay, I just want to get that off the table, because, sometimes desperate people take desperate measures, and we're not even close to being desperate, but, we're all looking at, because the one underlying theme in all of the testimony and all the analysis is that this pension issue is a continuing problem. You said, and I want to make sure, you referenced that the economy revenues for our city is basically 60%.
Approximately.
60% of our...
Between the wage, the sales, the burn tax, and arguably the real estate transfer.
If you continue to reduce those, as we to a large degree would like to do, i.e. reducing wage tax, reducing all of the various other taxes, how do you make that revenue up?
Well, I think that the general expectation is that to the extent those taxes are reduced, that will have a stimulus effect upon the economy as a whole, and the hope is that overall revenues will grow at a rate higher than is being reduced by the tax reduction. Whether or not that is going to be encountered is something that is somewhat speculative, so you can't be certain whether or not it will occur or not, but I believe that that's generally the expectation, is that the more that the taxes are reduced, the greater the incentive are for people and for businesses to come to and to stay in the city, and then overall it will be a net positive.
Can I just add?
Sure.
Sorry, I just keep talking. But one of my concerns about the city's credit profile is the tax reductions, because although, there are economic impacts for cutting taxes, the country and the state are in for what is likely to be a long-term slow growth scenario. Long-term, the federal government will have less money. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the total amount of outstanding U.S. Treasury bonds, which is really the composite of all the deficits that we've run before, are going to roughly double as a percent of national GDP over the next 30 years. So the federal government is most likely to push down additional unfunded mandates and to cut state aid over the next 30 years. The state is, as we've seen this year, not a terribly reliable partner, and is also likely to reduce local aid long-term. So the city should consider a charge to maximize locally controlled revenues to the greatest extent it can, even at the detriment of some economic growth near term, because in the longer term, you're going to want to have as many local revenues as possible. Those are going to be the ones that are most predictable long term.
Okay. Let me ask you a quick question with respect, because we actually reduced a significant amount of taxes since the Rendell years in John Street, and they got together and they created a incremental decrease in taxes on a long-term basis. And we actually, when we were having the constitutional amendment conversation, we had no idea how much taxes that we have reduced business taxes over a period of time. Is there, in your minds, and I know you're here for somewhat of a different reason, is there a point in time when you're supposed to make an assessment of the tax reduction program, and if you can determine if, in fact, it is creating the stimulus effect, i.e. creating more jobs? Because when I look at what we've done since mid-'90s and '99, and we have our good friends in the business community tell us, keep reducing our taxes, we're going to create more jobs. Not really happening. The reality is that a significant amount of the jobs that are being increased are being done in our health and eds and meds, in which they don't actually pay a lot of taxes because of the nonprofit status. So at some point, I mean, is there a timeline? Is like at 10 years, if you don't see any measurable?
I'm not sure that I'm in a position to tell you what that point may occur. Obviously, the interests of an individual entity or individual corporation may differ from the perspective of the administration of the city as to what is serving the best interests of the citizens holistically. So I'm not sure that I'd be in a position to tell you exactly when the cutting itself may sort of reach its maximum effectiveness.
All right. No, I understand. I got to ask the question, we tend to ask these questions of the administration, so I'd like to get a third-party response,
The only thing is that when you think, again, thinking this sort of long-term, slow-growth perspective, in general, taxes are going up, not necessarily in the city, but at the state undertaxes its people. The income tax is too low in Pennsylvania. Long-term, that's going to have to rise to cover all the liabilities that Pennsylvania has to pay. The federal government will likely have to raise taxes and reduce tax preferences and tax deductions. So the overall amount of tax that City of Philadelphia residents are going to pay will be higher going forward. To the extent you are removing yourself from the equation now, you might be crowded out later.
Okay. So let me tell you, because I don't, I do this for a living maybe a couple of months out of the year during the budget. I do other things during the course of the year. So just when I look at it, I say, okay, so there's been a significant amount of reduced taxes, and job growth has been, minimal, particularly as it relates to the tax reduction. But what I do see, and this is more on a national level, I see wages flatlining pretty much, and there's a small tick up here of late. But I see growth in bonuses and incomes of people, and I don't like calling people 1%, but whatever, you get my gist. So the question is, if you shift that focus and increase the wages of the people, the middle class and the lower income individuals, and they have more expendable capital, as opposed to allowing the 1%ers, 2%ers, whatever, to continue to increase their bottom line, wouldn't that be a better strategy? And you may, again, I understand if you can't answer that question, but I got to ask who's sitting up at the table.
So I'm not a tax analyst in that way, but in general, right, and it's not unreasonable, right, to raise tax on the 1% or on corporations, but those taxpayers are better at avoiding taxes than the middle class and the working class. So it reduces your draw, the city's total draw, to the extent you are moving up the income spectrum to, as far as your tax burden. I'm also generally a believer in having everyone pay at least a little tax to feel part of the participation in the city government. But this is I wouldn't presume to tell the council what to do as far as that.
I think everybody should pay. The question is, I'm looking. We're getting ready to do a series of Keystone Opportunity Zones, and create zones where you don't pay taxes in those zones, right? And the thought is to create jobs. And my position is that, we got a lot of taxes over the last 20 years, right? And at some point, you got to sit back and say, well, does this really work? Or do we, increase wages and see maybe if increasing wages works? Because those people on the lower rung of the income spectrum tend to spend their money locally, based on what I've seen over the years. And like I say, I only do this a couple of years. Most of the time I'm out trying to do rec centers and, all the other stuff that we do as elected officials.
The city of Chicago has been relatively successful over the last year in raising multiple taxes, and property tax, water and sewer tax, and other taxes, all very specifically pledged to pay down the city's pensions. So providing transparency in what exactly is happening and where the money is exactly going, because everyone knows that Chicago has a pension issue, has helped smooth the way towards more tax increases.
Okay, all right. To the Recognized Councilman Bond.
Thank you, Council President, and good afternoon. Just a few questions, and maybe you could answer for me. Do you have an idea of the total debt of the city of Philadelphia?
Yes, the city of Philadelphia, between its general obligation debt and its service agreement debt, is approximately $4 billion, $4.1 billion.
$4 billion?
Yes.
That's bonded debt. And then adding in pensions is roughly another $6 billion, although under more reasonable return expectations, it's probably more like $7 or $8 billion for pensions, and then another billion or so for retiree medical. So
Okay.
you have to think about it all as debt.
So how much, in relationship to our meeting today, how much of our total debt would be affected by a bond rating?
Well, it's all calculated in when the rating agencies do their debt ratios. They count unfunded debt as a liability, and it's calculated both as bonded debt and then unfunded liability, so you'll see the ratios both ways.
Let me rephrase the question. How much of the debt would be affected by an interest rate change, by a rating change of Moody's or Fitch or whatever? In other words, and include in that, where you said there were swap agreements that had certain items in there that said if we fall below a certain level, they can raise the rate. Do we have that information?
The vast preponderance of the outstanding debt that I mentioned a moment ago is fixed rate in nature and will not change its interest rate as a function of changes in any of the credit ratings. There is a portion of the outstanding debt that is variable rate in nature, which in large part carry liquidity facilities. Those liquidity facilities do typically have triggers in them that says in the event of a diminution of the credit, there can be an increase in the facility fee or the cost to provide that liquidity facility. Off the top of my head, I think the amount of that debt that is GEO-related is something south of 400 million between the GEO and certain of the service agreement debt. With respect to the swaps, that would not have an effect unless there was a several notch decrease in the credits rating before there would be events that would require either the posting of collateral or even under more draconian scenarios, a termination of the swap and a payment of the mark-to-market values under those swaps. At the current ratings in the A category, A1, A, and A minus, being the three respective ratings, the events that I described relating to the swaps would not happen unless there was a 3 or 4 notch reduction in the credit rating.
So here's what I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to identify, for everyone's benefit, the importance of our credit rating. And I'm trying to tie it to the cost it'll incur to the city if the rating changes up or down. So if we go up 2 notches in our credit rating, how much money will we save annually by having that increase?
It is probably in the neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it should also be taken into consideration that the subsequent debt that the city may take on over the years coming will be affected by changes in rating, because of course that debt is not fixed at this time. It has not been borrowed yet, so it's in the city's interest to maximize its ability to reduce that borrowing cost, and one of the ways to do that is by trying to achieve the highest credit rating that it is able to do so.
Let me follow on that. It would be, like Pete said, in general, the direct financial impact of a bond rating change is really only when the city issues new bonds. And so, the net difference to the city is relatively small.
Except with respect to the existing variable rate debt.
Right, no, of course. And, and there are other things, right? And so ratings are not the be-all and end-all. And, a rating is like your credit score, right? Of you as a person, right? It doesn't mean that you're doing your job as a council member or as a father or husband or whatever. It's your credit score, right? So it's only a small part of your overall. But when you have, the combination of the city's potentially fragile credit profile because of the unfunded pension, because of the thin reserves, and because of the interest rate swap exposure, combined with an increasingly brittle system for rating bonds. Nationally, the rating agencies have become more regulated from the top down. So ratings, more than ever before, are subject to multi-notch changes. My firm called them super downgrades because there have been a bunch of them, and it's colorful and it sells subscriptions. But there are a lot of, but there have been many governments, including the city of Chicago, which suffered 3 to 4 rating notch downgrades, hinging on their pensions, hinging on their own management. So, you know, that somewhat higher potential for a large rating change combined with your potential exposure to it, I mean, that's a source of uncertainty that you don't necessarily want to have.
But wouldn't we also have first of all, I was told the total debt of the city, including obligation bonds, airport bonds, pension liabilities, was like $14 to $15 billion. Is that not accurate?
No, the general obligation debt and the service agreement debt, what is generally the tax-backed debt, is approximately $4 billion. If you further include the airport, the water department, and the gasworks, they in aggregate represent approximately an additional $4 billion.
So that's $8 billion. And
That's
then I was
correct.
including the $6 billion of the underfunded
Right,
pension.
but each of those have their own discrete and
Right.
unique sources of revenue for their
Right.
repayment.
But there's $14 billion that we're basically have to figure out how to pay back some way or another.
The $14 billion, I'm not familiar
Well,
with.
$6 billion is pension underfunded. So let me ask this question. If our
6 to
ratings
7.
increase, is there an opportunity to refinance the rates we have now and lower our payments?
Certainly. Virtually all of the outstanding debt of the city, as well as the other enterprise funds, have call features that permit them to be refunded at the option of the city or of the respective entity. And should conditions permit, the Treasurer's Office and the respective enterprise funds maintain ongoing database analyses to review the best refunding candidates, which often can occur both for tax reasons and also economic reasons, only very close to the call dates, which are often 10 years after the original issuance of the bonds. So as conditions permit, the city takes advantage of lower rates and refunds for savings when it is able to do so. That same situation could be expected to occur as conditions move forward, and again, a more favorable credit rating will lead to, other things being equal, a more favorable borrowing rate, and therefore permitting further savings when those refunding opportunities arise.
So let me just get to a finite point here. What I'm looking for is that for if we put up every $100 million that goes into reserves, how much money will we save? What's the return on that investment? Okay, as far as counting the ability to refinance, counting our current borrowings going forward, because then we have an economic number we can make an educated decision on.
The current, the current bond market, we're in probably the most aggressive lending market that any of us in this room have ever seen. So the market is not going to recognize the discipline that you provide, which makes it harder for the city to make those decisions. You would and should build up reserves to provide a cushion for your own financial health, right? Because it's not just the bondholders, it's all of the city stakeholders that need to be protected in an economic downturn. And to create an overall more predictable and resilient financial regime. You likely, the city's rating is more likely to fall than rise at this point. But even if it were to rise, it's very unlikely that it will get into the AA category, where there could be a meaningful reduction, maybe like 30 to 40 basis points, or about 0.3 to 0.4% of an interest rate reduction, which even in the scheme of things is not terribly large. So even if you were to add $100 million into reserves, it probably wouldn't move the needle as far as your borrowing costs, but it would make you feel better. It would make a better, more predictable system. Were you to do a real meaningful increase in reserves, $400 million or $600 million into reserves, that could move the city into the AA category, and that could potentially reduce your cost.
What kind of savings would happen if that occurred?
Again, it wouldn't be as much as, you're the market is never going to recognize the full value of your investment in reserves. You should be putting money into reserves for its own sake, to make the system more predictable and resilient long-term. The ratings generally reflect that, but it's not a trade-off in which you would gain more than you would lose.
I would add to what Matt is saying that the penalty or consequences of downgrades is more severe than the potential upside in upgrades. Generally speaking, the more the credit declines, the more the spread increases relative to a more favorable credit rating. So the risk that the city is currently in with respect to its admittedly low fund balance situation and the expectation of a further reduction to levels that are not supportive of a single A rating increase the likelihood of more actions similar to what we saw yesterday with Moody's. And the ramifications there are more severe than the possible further savings that you could achieve by having upgrades. So there is risk on both sides of this. There is both benefit from action in improving the fund balance and risk from inaction.
So is there some analysis that would show us for every 2 notches we drop what our costs would be to give us the impetus to keep it?
I'm sure that's something that we could prepare and provide.
Let me ask you another question. I know that poverty is a really big issue in the city of Philadelphia, huge issue. We have 26% of our population in poverty. And I'm just wondering how big of an issue that is as it relates to fund balance and pensions. And I'm going to give you this example that I've gleaned from the information from Matt. Chicago, Illinois, Houston, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Dallas, Texas, Boston, Massachusetts all have poverty levels of 22.1 to 24.1%. They're in the range. Chicago's the lowest poverty, by the way, at 22.1, yet their rating is BA1. And Dallas, which has the highest poverty in that segment, has AA2. So how big is the poverty issue when you look at those 5 cities?
Yeah, well, it's one aspect of credit. So when you look at credit analysis for general obligation bonds, you're looking at the economy, which is I believe all 3 rating agencies put the heaviest weight on that percentage. So it's an important factor, but also looking at management, you're looking at debt, you're looking at finances too. So it's just one aspect of it. Boston may have that higher poverty rate, and I'd like to see that number because I don't know that I've seen that number show up. I believe Boston carries reserves, when you count all the dedicated reserves, of probably 40% of their budget. And their economy is growing, it's dynamic, their budget's very predictable, they get a large percentage of state aid, so all of these other factors sort of pepper in and offset that one aspect of the credit. Standard & Poor's does a scoring method, and if your income levels are below a certain point, it affects your economic score to a degree, but again, it's only one aspect of the rating factors.
I understand that, and my point is that I think the issue isn't as much on the ratings of poverty, because when you look at the city of Cleveland, Ohio, they have 39% of the population in poverty, and they have an A1 rating higher than us. The issue is really fund balances and the pension funding piece. That's really the issue.
Ratings are like your credit score, right? So they don't, so if the city had a fraction of the outstanding debt that it had, right, and if it had enormous fund balances, then its rating would be much higher, right? Like the ideal AAA city spends almost no money on things like poverty or education or police services. It collects an enormous amount of taxes, and it keeps everything in the bank in treasury bills. So being a AAA city doesn't mean that you're a great city. It just means that you're a pretty safe as far as financial risk.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Looks like there's no other questions. Gentlemen, thank you for coming, hanging in there. I know you were out there for a while, and I know you have to get going. So I appreciate the expertise you brought in here today. Thank you very much. We have one more group here, well, a couple we've heard from already, Mr. Breslin and Mr. DeBoe. Walter Spencer, I know you have you want to speak? And Mr. Piper, were you just here for questions, or did you have something particular? I do. Well, come on up then. Okay. Yeah, just one there. Okay. Good afternoon again. Who would like to, Ms. Piper, you want to go first? Or you have...
Sure, I'll go.
Okay.
No problem. Good afternoon, Councilman Greenlee and members of council. My name is Michael Piper. I'm the City of Philadelphia's Chief Assessment Officer, and I thank City Council for the opportunity to address the committee today. The Office of Property Assessment is responsible for carrying out all duties of the Assessment Office of the City of Philadelphia, that being the discovery, listing, and valuing of all real property in the City of Philadelphia in a fair and equitable manner. The Office of Property Assessment is also responsible for establishing legal addresses for all parcels, providing a response to real property tax appeals, applying real property tax exemptions, and administering the real property tax abatement program. As you all know, the OPA has been engaged for the past 3+ years in a critical process of correcting years of confusing, inequitable, and inconsistent property tax assessments. What's come to be known as the Actual Value Initiative, or AVI, has involved an effort on the part of OPA to make assessments for over 579,000 parcels more accurate and uniform for all property types, including residential, commercial, industrial, institutionally owned, as well as vacant parcels. And while the Office of Property Assessment has the responsibility for carrying out the long overdue changes that came with AVI, those changes could not have come about without the assistance from City Council as well as help from the state legislature. That assistance came about as a part of a general recognition that fair and equitable assessments can only contribute in a positive manner to the city's fiscal health. My testimony today relates to the Office of Property Assessment's continued efforts to improve the city's property tax system and to what further enhancements to parts of the system could mean to efforts to improve overall assessments and make the property tax a more reliable and accurate reflection of real estate values. So for tax year 2017, the focus of OPA's reassessment project was vacant land and the contributory value of the land portion of primarily residential parcels. Vacant land sales have always represented a very small percentage of overall sales in Philadelphia. However, at the outset of the initial year of the proposed revisions that were issued under AVI, which was tax year 2014, it was clear that many parcels included land assessments that were substantially lower than what the market indicated the values were. Particularly concerning were the land assessment to total assessment ratios of the overall condominium inventory, which was approximately 8.5% in 2016. For 2017, the proposed revised assessments included changes that increased the land portion of the total assessment to 12.4%. For 2017 also, proposed revisions for single-family land to total assessment ratios increased only slightly, but overall land values increased by 11.39%, and taxable land values increased by 11.24%. We've been talking a lot about the commercial reassessments that we're working on now. So for ad value tax purposes, OPA conducts regular assessment efforts that are referred to as mass appraisal. But mass appraisal is defined as the systematic appraisal of groups of properties as of a given date using standardized procedures in statistical testing. But while good mass appraisal practice dictates using the most recent information in order to predict the most reliable and accurate values, the requirement that the value be as of a given date also restricts how recent the information tends to be. So when the city initially rolled out new assessments for 2013 for tax year 2014, those assessments were basically derived from information that was compiled from sales that had taken place in third and fourth quarter 2011 and at best and in early 2012, so they were already a couple years old. While subsequent reassessment projects in 2015 and 2016 aimed at correcting uniformity deficiencies for residential properties have considered more recent sales data, commercial assessments have lagged. Because we have recognized this, OPA is currently engaged in a reassessment effort that in March of 2017 will produce updated assessments for the over 60,000 commercial and industrial properties that include 27,237 hotels and apartments, 14,237 mixed-use properties, 14,665 office and retail properties, and 4,361 industrial properties. Additionally, while OPA's most experienced evaluators are routinely assigned the most complex commercial inventory, we also recognize that the magnitude of this focused effort demands that professional commercial real estate appraisers be part of the department's effort. For commercial property in particular, reliable assessments are based on information obtained by way of research into sales data that reveal how much of a sales price is or should be attributable to the real estate itself, not just the price reported in the paper or on a recorded deed. Commercial real estate appraisers that can rely on years of experience but also databases that include such factual information can only enhance OPA's efforts. Knowledgeable and respected expert consultants in the commercial real estate industry are also needed to assist in the defense of established assessments that will be challenged on appeal before the BRT. For these reasons, we're seeking the services of a commercial real estate consultant with experience in property tax assessment issues. In July of 2016, OPA issued an RFP seeking such a consultant and hopes to soon contract with one of the responsive vendors. In terms of our ongoing quest for a CAMA system, so since the office's creation in 2010 as a separate agency, OPA has been moving towards acquiring an off-the-shelf customizable computer-assisted mass appraisal or CAMA system. We talked a little about that earlier, but the number of vendors, I can tell you, capable of providing a large jurisdiction such as Philadelphia with a CAMA system that can handle our complex and varied needs are few. As of today, OPA, with project funding from the Office of Innovation and Technology and project management resources from the Office of Property Data, is still in the process of seeking a qualified CAMA vendor. After a long process that included vetting the companies and software programs of several CAMA vendors, OPA is still without a CAMA system. An RFP for a CAMA vendor was recently reissued and proposals were submitted. A decision is expected by the end of this year. However, there is concern about coming to terms, and without a modern, customized, off-the-shelf CAMA system, OPA struggles to timely complete its annual mass appraisal process. No other similarly large jurisdiction in the United States is currently functioning without some type of CAMA system. A modern CAMA system would make annual comprehensive assessments much less time and resource consuming, and would help eliminate some of the errors caused by the lack of a statistical component that is integrated with an off-the-shelf mass appraisal system. The CAMA system would also eliminate much of the time delay in getting taxpayers adjusted bills that are generated as a result of assessment revisions. The City of Philadelphia is also home to many nonprofit institutions, and as a city, as one of the largest concentrations of nonprofit hospitals and universities in the nation. Most of the real property owned by these nonprofits is statutorily exempt from property taxes. However, many of the exemptions enjoyed by these nonprofit owners were granted decades ago based on use or nonprofit status that may have changed since the original exemption was granted. OPA is responsible for implementing the statutory exemptions for parcels owned and operated by institutional nonprofit owners. However, a fair and simple method of auditing all such parcels has proven to be a struggle and a challenge. The department is currently working on a comprehensive but less burdensome way of ensuring that all exempt parcels are being assessed properly in regard to the taxable status of each parcel. This will need to involve input from the city agencies involved, but also the nonprofit community and council itself. So the improvement of the city's property taxes system can make the property tax a more reliable source by making the system fair and consequently more acceptable. And at this point, I thank you for the opportunity to present testimony, and we'll be happy to answer any questions or...
Yeah, what we'd like to do, hear Mr. Spencer first, and then whatever people have questions. Ms. Spencer, first let me add on to what other people have said about thanking you for all the work you've done. And also, now we have your written testimony, if you'd just like to add to that, or and I know there's questions here, so however you'd like to handle it.
Well, thank you, Councilman, thank you for the kind words. I won't read the testimony, except I would like to talk about the camera for a minute.
Okay.
It's been 42 years since New York State and California started using camera systems. So at this point, it's a relatively mature technology. And Mr. Piper was correct that Philadelphia is the only jurisdiction besides that either is not using a camera system or is using a camera system, or they're either not using one or don't have a contract in place to get one. In 2014, 2 years ago, the city issued an RFP, did a very thorough evaluation, and selected a vendor to install a system. However, the parties were not able to agree on terms of a contract. So the city has recently reissued the RFP and received updated proposals. In reviewing these updated proposals, it is critical that the city contract with a vendor who previously installed a camera system in a large, complex jurisdiction like Philadelphia. Having installed camera systems in jurisdictions as large as 7,000 people, or as small as 7,000 people, and as large as the city of New York, I can tell you that you're talking about apples and oranges. And what the city of Philadelphia needs to do is to work with a vendor who has experience in a jurisdiction of this size and complexity. In negotiating with the vendors who responded to the city's most recent RFP, the city should not allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good in negotiating an agreement. It is time to enter into a reasonable agreement with a vendor and move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I recognize it, I'd just like to add on the camera, I guess Mr. Stitt and I were talking off record here. I just don't understand, and I heard the answers of why it still hasn't happened yet, but as Mr. Piper said, it seems like a very critical thing, and I guess just as a statement, I still don't get why it's taking so long to get something that everybody seems to agree is crucial to getting it right and getting it more accurate and getting it more quickly. So anyway, I'll leave that at that. And Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Councilman. Couple questions. Good afternoon, by the way.
Good afternoon.
In 2014, when AVI was completed, what was the total valuation of real estate in the city?
About 99 billion taxable, I think it was about 135, 136 billion overall.
So I was always told it was like 134 billion.
About that, yeah.
And about 101, 103 billion is taxable, and the rest is nonprofit, or roughly.
I think it came down to about 99 billion at the time of certification.
And if we looked at those numbers in 2016, where does that portfolio stand? What's the value?
It's about maybe 93 billion taxable, maybe between 92 and 93 billion, and BRT is pretty much finished hearing most of the appeals, but there are some still outstanding.
What's the total valuation? Is it still 134?
It's less.
Less. Is that because of all the appeals that came in that lowered the value?
That's the primary reason, yes.
And so we haven't moved the needle in 3 years on real estate valuations, really.
Well, we have.
We moved them, but if I'm a stockholder, which all we are in the city of Philadelphia, and I just said, you just said that there's $134 billion that the city's worth in 2014, and today in 2016, it's worth roughly the same. We haven't really captured any valuation in the big picture of the total real estate market.
So it's about 94 billion in taxable now, correct? And that included what happened with appeals decisions that kind of tend to drive it the other way. What we've done since AVI, since 2014, if you can remember, for 2015, because of the magnitude of the project, we really couldn't do any reassessment work. And, although we always said we would be doing ongoing reassessments, the first year after 2014 was sort of like cleaning up after a disaster. Frankly, we were as ready for it as we could be, but there were a record number of appeals. When I say record, I mean on a good year, we would get 2,500 appeals. For AVI, we got over 25,000. That kind of prevented us from doing much reassessment work because the same people that handle the reassessment also answer the appeals. Then subsequently, what we did last year for 2016 was kind of correct some uniformity issues in certain areas.
So then, if we...
One other difference between the initial number we were talking about and the number now is the homesteads, which took out, I think, about $6 billion in taxable value. So that's another difference between the two numbers.
Right now, from a revenue standpoint, what do we bill in 2016 for real estate taxes?
So we're billing off 91.5 billion at a rate of 1.34%.
So it's about $1.3 billion roughly, in that range?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I know the camera system's important, but it seems to me, and you're addressing it, and I know Walter's working on it with you, this commercial assessment is the biggest potential of dollars in that whole area.
Yeah, we agree. Right now, well, there's two things that are factual, okay? Number one, as I said, for AVI, last time we did a comprehensive reassessment that included commercial property, we were using, among other things, sales data, which is what kind of drives what we do, sales data, because it's actually factual and historical. We use sales data from third and fourth quarter 2012. That was the most recent, and in most cases, first and second quarter 2012, and in most cases 2011 and older. So by the time we rolled out the data in 2013 for tax year 2014, it was as recent as it could be, but since then, and you and I have had the discussion, Councilman Dom, there's been sales of commercial properties in 2015 and 2016 that indicate we're under-assessed, at least on those properties and probably on a lot of other commercial properties.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to use 1616 Walnut as an example because I know the building. It's called the Icon. It sold about 2 years ago for $110 million.
Mm-hmm.
We have it assessed for, I think, $48 million. Yeah, there was an actual sale price of $110. And it must be under abatement, I would assume, because they did a lot of renovation work there.
Right.
But the other issue is that the land value is $910,000. So I'm looking at that and saying, number one, our market value is off by 50%. And our land value probably should be at least 10% of the market value. So we're off, it should be 10 million versus 900,000.
Probably more than 10%.
Yeah,
I'm
just you being conservative. So is there any way that, that you can get information from the recorder of deeds on sales immediately that can be piped into your system?
Oh, That's a good question. We get information from the Recorder of Deeds about sale prices on I think twice a month. That's not the problem. The problem is for a building like 1660 Walnut, and I'm familiar with it. I went to Temple there years ago, and I know it's sold. In fact, on most commercial properties, the number that we get, that which is on a deed, doesn't tell the whole story. The number that's reported in the paper doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. On commercial property in particular, because a commercial property the sale of a commercial property could, just on one property alone, could include more than just the real estate, but sometimes it could be part of another sale in which there's an allocation number put on the deed, which they're allowed to do. It's a little misleading if you say this is what the property's worth because this is what it's sold for. One of the reasons we think it's going to be helpful to have commercial consultants in is because they will be able to get the information you're referring to, kind of the DNA of the sale itself that's going to tell us, pick it apart and say, some of that money was spent for personal property, some of it was spent was allocated as a part of a general sale in which, in order to avoid paying personal property taxes in whatever state the sale took place in, they just allocated it to a property in Philadelphia because Pennsylvania doesn't have personal property tax. There's ways in which, and I'm not suggesting anyone's doing anything dishonest, but what I am suggesting is that we can't just look at those numbers and say, that's what that was worth. That's the first thing. The second thing is, what we'll never be able to do, even if when we look at the sale and we find out that it indeed sold for $110 million, and that was just the real estate, one thing we'll never be able to do is go back and reassess a property based on the sale of that property alone, okay? You can in some places, but in Pennsylvania, you're risking being accused of spot assessment, which kind of undermines the credibility of what we're doing overall.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Squilla?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the process, and we looked at the AVI assessments since 2013-14, and we currently see the ability of some people to sell the buildings without selling the buildings. And we have it where they do a transaction, and the building actually doesn't pay a real estate transfer tax. Is there something we could do as far as requiring sales, or is that something that, I guess is the question for Rob, that we could do legislatively to put something in that would require, even during these transactions, that there would be some type of tax?
Yeah. I think there are some things that we can do, and we'd be happy to meet with you to talk about the specifics of what might make sense.
Because it seems like the larger sale buildings, and I guess Alan could speak to this too, he probably won't like it, but it seems like there's a way around the transfer tax on some of these larger sales.
There are certain structures that, but I think it would make sense for us to kind of have a meeting and discuss it.
Alan, do you want to interject?
We have the tools to utilize that by not having the proper assessments on the commercial properties. If we had the proper assessments on the commercial properties, they couldn't use a lot of those tools. They're using those tools, I think, based off the current assessments, which are low. You have a property sold for $10 million, the city assesses it for $3 million, and they're probably paying, somehow they're figuring out how to pay transfer tax on the assessment, I'm guessing. But if we fix those assessments, we'll close that loophole to a large degree.
Okay. And hopefully we're doing that, because next year is the year where we're going to hit the commercial properties and the commercial land, if I understand correct.
You'll see numbers for commercial properties, including land, vacant commercial land, in March of 2017 for 2018, yes.
And, all right, so this year we redid the residential land, vacant land.
Correct.
And also residential land on properties.
Right.
Do we see, or did we have an increase of any appeals for, after that and the change?
We got some first-level review applications in. I don't think we have any comprehensive numbers from BRT in terms of formal appeals because the filing deadline is not until the first Monday of October.
Right.
Most people tend to file at the last minute.
Okay, because we knew, obviously, when you change the assessments or any assessments that are changed, and especially next year when we do the commercial, they have the wherewithal and the ability to challenge some of our assessments.
Right.
And understanding that we're hiring some professional help and getting people in to help us do that.
Yes.
And hopefully some legal people to do it properly would reduce the number of appeals, but they're still going to probably appeal. So then next year, we're going to go through a lot of effort, I guess, to justify it. Are we using our staff to do that, or are we going to also use some consultant work to do that?
Right, so the consultants we're looking to hire, we're looking to use them in a few different ways. We're looking to use them to help us establish accurate values, okay? We're looking for them to help us, while they're there, to work with our commercial assessors in sort of a training capacity, so, you know, while they're there, they don't leave and take all that knowledge with them. And I think probably the most important part, though, is for them to help us in the defense of the values, because when you have a commercial appraiser who's been in the business for 20 or 30 years and has the recognition of, because they've been in there before the BRT, to just be honest, they kind of recognize as the experts, and it tends to give a little bit more credence to the number. The number could still be good, but with the commercial appraiser, we're hoping they're going to be able to present credible testimony to kind of
That was my question.
support
Are we
us.
so we're going to hold
Yes.
them on, hopefully ask for help through the appeal process?
That's what we're looking to contract with them to do, yes.
Okay. So is the contract out?
The RFP deadline was, I think, 2 weeks ago, and we did receive several responses that we're going over right now.
And when would the decision be made of who you're looking to hire?
We're looking to make a decision before the end of this month, before the end of September.
Okay, but that does include the whole process of the training, the assessments, and also the appeal?
Yes.
Okay. All right, because I know, just from seeing what happened in the past with just the residential, and there was a lot of it, and there was some people who hired professional people to help them, and you could see the difference between hiring somebody professional and going up there yourself, what
Sure.
the results are. So we need to be able to get that. Now, I also, one other question, and I guess, I'm not sure if that comes with you or Rob, the properties that come off the tax abatement. I know we saw a story, I think, by the controller, that it would be 55 million over the next 5 years.
Right. Those are numbers that are built into our 5-year plan already, so that's revenue we already anticipated in the 5-year plan that was just approved by PICA.
Are the change in assessments of commercial properties built into the 5-year plan?
We have projections for those assessments in the plan, yes.
So the extra additional dollars are already added into the plan, because I know when we talked earlier, and I was listening to the hearing, the conversation of spending more than we're receiving, is that something that takes into account these additional dollars into our 5-year plan, or is it saying that our rating has a chance to go down because it looks like we're overspending, even though our balance, our fund was low?
So we're assuming growth in commercial. I think it's 3% the first year, 1% the next year, and then 3% each year after that. Based on Walt's testimony, those are really conservative numbers. So, if those numbers, if Walt's numbers are close to right, then we would get more revenue than we're showing in the plan.
Well, that would be helpful. So hopefully that will increase our fund balance or use our money for additional services that are necessary for the city. But, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. We'll always accept more money if we can get it, right? Yeah. If I could just sneak one question in here. On the first level of appeals, Mr. Piper, any idea, or you keep a record or any general idea of how many assessments are changed at the first level category?
We do. We keep a record.
About how many would you say are in some way adjusted? Do you have any idea?
For which year? For what year? For what tax year?
Well, say the one where there was a tremendous amount of...
For 2014?
Yeah, 2014, right.
We do keep a very precise record on how many were changed, either revised upward or downward, because a few were revised upward, but, and I can get that information for you.
Okay, if you could get that to us, that might be interesting
Sure.
to see how many get done at just the first level review. I appreciate that. Councilman Don, you start. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilman. Another question on Walter Spencer's testimony. Mr. Piper, do you agree with his estimate on commercial property assessments could yield 75 to 100 million a year in incremental revenue for 2018?
I can say this, and I answer your question the best way I can without saying yes or no. We have seen indications also that since we rolled these numbers out in 2014, that many commercial properties have increased in value based on the sales that we've seen, which indicates that in some cases our assessments are low, and in other cases are very low. I don't want to even speculate on what the difference between our assessment is now and what it will be when we actually undergo a reassessment, because, like I said, we have to look into everything, not just the sale prices that we see on the deeds. So we have started the reassessment effort, but we're not even close to being able to make those projections yet.
Okay, and the other question is the defensive values in Mr. Spencer's testimony. Do you agree with that whole concept?
What was that?
He has in his testimony, property owners basically having, I know for sure that some of the assessments that you guys sent out recently, people are already going to come in and try to appeal them.
Oh, sure.
It's just normal.
Yeah, well, for commercial assessments in particular, we expect to see appeals, and those appeals will be forwarded by property owners who will have the best appraisers and attorneys at their dispense.
I guess in his testimony, he says that BRT relies on these reports when rendering a decision,
Right.
and changes made by BRT have reduced property tax revenues by as much as $25 million a year. By having these experts outside, do you think that will dramatically lower that number?
We believe that's why we're looking to hire, and we believe that will be the case, yes.
Is there anything else that we should be doing in helping us manage this $134 billion portfolio of real estate?
Well, I think we're going in the right direction with the commercial reassessment, and, I thank Walt Spencer for helping us and taking a look at the responses that we got in, and he's actually been giving us quite a bit of help in coming in and taking a look at what we needed to do with some of our commercial assessments. So I think we're going in the right direction. I think it's going to be helpful when we finally get closer to having a camera system for us to be able to plan. One of the things that Saskia had talked about in terms of how the camera system will help us do comprehensive assessments every year is it's not just a matter of making things go smoother or faster. It's going to give us a way to enhance our processes, period. There's processes that we could put in place right now that would allow us to do this better and more frequently, more accurately if we had a camera system.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for your cooperation.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. If I just ask one question, again, going back to Mr. Spencer's written testimony here, talks about review of exempt parcels.
Right.
Mr. Piper, right now, are you able, staff-wise, to do much of that? Do you kind of act on, if it's just brought to your attention, and how important do you think that could be? Because Mr. Spencer says it could, approach $30 million as far as money for the city and the school district. Again, I know you got staff issues and all, but how does that work right now? Or does it?
Well, I don't think it's a staff issue. I think it's an issue of sort of having the will to do it. As you know, Councilman, we sort of went down this road a little bit over the past couple of years. Maybe we needed to do it a different way. I do believe that we're struggling to find a way that we can comprehensively look at all the property owned by all nonprofits and figure out which ones are, A, being used for the same purposes in which they got the exemption in the first place.
Right.
And B, make sure that the nonprofit is also retaining the same status that made them eligible for the exemption. So to answer your question, how do we do it? Unfortunately, it comes to our attention when someone points out, here's a property over here owned by, let's say, a university or a small nonprofit, and we don't know what it's being used for, and then someone points out it's not being used at all. That's not eligible for an exemption.
Right.
But
And this might be another area where it makes sense for us to have a meeting and kind of go through what our options are and what people are willing to do and not willing to do.
No, I got you. And I know that gets controversial because some of those entities then come to folks like us and say, well, what are you doing to us? So, I know how that works, but no, I just thought, just was wondering generally.
It's a concern, but we want to make sure we do it the right way. So that's why, as I said, we want to have that conversation with council and representatives of the nonprofit community, too.
That's fair. Councilman Dom, you had another question?
Yes, thank you, Councilman. Before we had some questions, then we switched to the second panel. Can I have some questions for Rob? I know he's dying to hear from me.
I think he's been waiting for that, sure.
So I want to bring up the recent labor contract.
Sure.
And I was just wondering, has the city, I know that Richie Laser was involved in that, and believe did a very good job, but does the city also have outside counsel who's involved in that?
We did. We had outside counsel, and the law department helps. Our Office of Labor Relations helps. We're involved in finance and budget.
And the outside counsel, were they involved in recommendations on the contract too?
They were involved in discussions, yeah.
And what I was trying to understand from the contract is that the difference economically of the old agreement versus the new agreement over the next 4 years, what's the total amount of dollar difference between the two contracts?
I can tell you the cost of the new contract. I'd have to go back and look at the old contract.
Right.
I think the new for the general fund was, is it 135? $153. I flipped those. Oh, with fire. So 119 was the 5-year plan cost of the 33 agreement for us. That doesn't net out any benefit from the pension side of it, but that was the total cost.
So can you, not do it today, but can you send us the analysis of, if we had stayed on the old program over the next 4 years, this would have been the total cost versus the new program?
When you say the old program, are you talking about the pay raises from the old? I'm not sure what I mean.
Yeah, if we hadn't changed a lot of the details in the new contract, pension-related specifically.
Oh, you want to know what the, okay.
Impact, financial impact.
So, of the pension changes. So, for our actuary, it's really hard to break out just the impact of DC 33 because they're part of the municipal plan. We have had them show us what would happen if all unions got that same deal and what that would look like for our funding percents, and we can show you that if that's helpful.
Yeah. So, and I have another question. In the budget, if I read it correctly, that we approved, we set aside about $200 million for labor obligations?
Originally, yes.
Originally. But then it had to be modified to add an additional $128 million?
119 for 33, and then there was about 35 million for fire, so about 155, and then we put in 170 roughly in contingency, so we upped that number from the 200 to, I guess, about 325.
So why were we so far off in our budget for that? It seems like a big number to be off.
So we never said that the number was what collective bargaining agreements would cost us. We said we were putting a contingency in to help us afford collective bargaining agreements. And it's still the same. That contingency is not supposed to represent a projection of what we think collective bargaining agreements will cost.
And the other question I had on the DC 33 agreement, I know that in the, if if I recall, in the pension program, I think it's a stacked hybrid.
Stacked hybrid,
And I think the number was 50,000, above 50,000?
correct.
How many employees in District 33 are over 50,000?
It's a couple of thousand, I can get you the
I would like to
exact.
know the numbers, over 50 and under
Yeah.
50.
Yeah.
You think it's a couple thousand over 50?
I think so, because it includes correctional officers.
Okay. And the other question, I mean, I recently met with the Pew people, and I kind of was like the federal government's side-by-side option. Have we looked at that option?
Side-by-side is kind of what we had before. I think the most common kind of critique of a side-by-side is that unlike the stack, it doesn't guarantee the same level of benefit up to an income level. So the stacked hybrid kind of ensures income security for people at lower salary levels, and then at upper salary levels, when relying more and more on the DC portion, the side-by-side doesn't offer that feature. So we have...
I think the federal program side-by-side is up to 30,000. And after that, it's shared 50/50.
Well, then it's kind of a modified stacked,
Yeah.
actually.
I'm just
That's
saying,
what they do.
If it's good enough for the federal government, I'm saying to myself, why shouldn't we look at that for Philadelphia?
There are a lot of things the federal government does that are worth looking at, and a lot of other things that we would say we wouldn't want to do.
Right. Last few questions. I know it's getting late. This whole issue with Governor Christie and the tax agreement, have we been looking at what the financial, is that a positive, negative? What do you think the financial implication of that is?
Our preliminary analysis is that it's a state-to-state issue and really doesn't have a direct impact on us. Yeah.
That's good news. I don't think I have any other questions. I just want, by the way, I want to thank, again, your department, Rob, and Michael Piper's department, Revenue. You guys have been great working with me, and I really appreciate all your efforts.
We appreciate all your help.
Yeah,
It's
thank you
been
very
great
much.
working with you.
Thanks. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilman. Well, guys, I know you want to hang in with us through dinner, but since there's no other questions,
We want to stay here through budget season, just
Yeah,
can't say
yeah,
that-
right, yeah, okay, all right. So, thank you. The Committee on, what are we, Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation will stand in recess to the call of the chair. Thank you.